Good evening, everybody. This is Pete Morris for a Thursday night Zoom, as usual. Tonight, we're talking about the surviving a catastrophic engine failure. Will Carpenter had the fortune or misfortune of having a catastrophic engine failure, and he's going to talk all about it. It's really worth the time to listen to this thing. And so we'll get right on to it. At this point, we can go back to our usual beginning of the Zoom and talk about who you are and where you are. Key the mic. You all have the possibility of uh, uh, opening up your mic, and then please, if you would not mind, when you're done, again, close off the mic. Thank you.
I'm Doug Linville. I'm over in Missouri. My airplane, I've got a 1961 250 Comanche, and it's based in Camdenton, Missouri. And we have had, I can't whine too much because I know you folks up in the Northeast get cold weather, but we have had extremely cold weather and a lot of snow.
Welcome, Doug, and thanks for being here with us. And this is CJ in Vermont, where we're getting all of Doug's really, really cold weather. We just got back onto the sunny side of 0, but we still haven't quite made freezing. So I'm flying either Dad's 260B or Sean Cash's 180 while he's stationed overseas. And I've got to go back over to California to pick it up. So welcome, and just join in and say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
Hi, gang. This is Patrick Lee. We're here in Minnesota, where it's nice and warm. High of 0 today, and we're flying a 260, and we're just enjoying it. And we had the 30 autopilot, and now we're getting the 3100 put in. So that goes in April 5th.
Oh, well done, Pat, and welcome. Thanks for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you.
And we have shy people. Nice to see some familiar faces. Jim Peters, if you haven't just set and forget. Good to see you on.
Good morning. I guess you can read it all on the screen, so I don't need to talk.
Well, welcome and good to see you. If y'all can see Jim's absolutely beautiful backdrop.
Yeah, I'm Pete Morris. I'm here in Connecticut, where right now we're getting some sleet, and the roads are crusted but not bad. The temperature's gone down to 27, so we're getting down there tonight. And I put my plane in a borrowed hangar. It's a first for me. And I actually started the thing up the other day, and it started on the third flip of the prop, right up there. Beautiful. I have a Comanche 250, and I enjoy it. Go ahead, key the mic, and who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
Pete, do you preheat your plane outside before you start the engine?
Yes, I do take it outside, and I close the door, and then I start the engine. I have faith.
Question has to do with preheating.
Oh, the preheating, yes, definitely I do the preheating. I put a heater just behind the wheel underneath the belly and warmed it up beautifully.
Good.
Hey guys,
Everybody,
hey
sorry,
guys,
go ahead.
Yeah, Serge St. Hilaire in Bromont, Quebec, Canada. I fly a new to me. I've had it for almost 6 months now. Comanche 400.
Huh, Serge, you went classy. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Who said that?
That was CJ saying that.
No, that has a 400.
Oh, that was Serge. That was Serge.
Serge St. Hilaire.
Yep.
his speaker looked like it was shorted out. I'm Ron Richmond, and I have a 400 in California.
Welcome, Ron, and good to see you. And thanks also for that hot starting procedure with your 400. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Grant Mooney's coming in. I hope he flies a Comanche.
And everybody just jump into any quiet spot and say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
Hey, I'm Emily, and this is Amelia. We just got a twin Comanche. We had a 180 prior that's getting loved on by somebody else. We are in El Paso, so it is about 60 today.
Emma Elizabeth, welcome. I saw pictures of your beautiful new bird and like, wow, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us tonight. And Emma and Elizabeth.
Yes, yeah, I am Elizabeth is my name on Facebook.
The mystery person.
Mark Deep. I'm in Nebraska, and I also fly a 400.
Awesome. Okay, Mark and Ron and Serge, you guys get to be in your own special room tonight. We just discovered we can create Zoom rooms. Well, welcome to another 400 driver. We had 6 400s at ComancheTown last year. Not last year because everything closed because of COVID, but 2019, there were 6 altogether. Beautiful sight.
Well, you other two that I heard, this is Ron Richmond. My 400, when I bought it 49 years ago, had just been turbocharged. And it was one of the original 6 that was turboed by Ray J. And I understand there have only been a couple since then, aftermarket turbos. So there's only about 8 of those turboed in the world.
Yeah, I think Stephen Osborne ended up with one of them. And who else has them, Ron?
Mine's just a straight 400.
Yeah.
It's still fast.
That's a lot easier to work on under the cowling than the one with the turbo. It's got extra equipment all over the place under there.
For the turbo, is that turbo normalized or a turbo that boosts?
Well, I don't know what normalized means. It is there's 2 of the larger Ray J turbos. They built 2 sizes of turbos, and it takes 2 of them on the 400 to do this job. And there's 2 inlets out on the front of the cowling with a long tube back to the turbo, and then from the turbo another tube that from each one that comes up and joins just before the fuel injector mechanism. So it's got a long line from the inlet, I'm sorry, out in the front of the cowl before it gets to the fuel injector mechanism.
Rick Foster here. I fly a 260 turbo and a 180 that's flies wonderful. But question for Ron, what kind of manifold pressure can you maintain up at altitude?
Well, I think pretty good. It's certified to fly to 25,000, and I think they mean that it will at least do 75% power at 25,000. I think it actually will do 75% above that, but it's sort of guaranteed to 25,000. I don't like to go up there though. I like, instead of breathing oxygen from a tube, I'd rather breathe it wholesale. So I stay down at 8.5 to 10.5 typically. I use the turbo for takeoff from high altitude airports or climbing on a bad day.
Excellent.
Hi, everybody. I guess I should say hello. I'm Ann Minder from California. I have November 6732 Papa. It's a 180. It's taken me all over lots of places, and I guess I'm going to keep it, but planning on a major upgrade, and I've been stumbling on the autopilot issue. So I'd sure like to have an autopilot. It's got a Britain, but you know how that is. So any suggestions? And also I've been looking on our various social media sites, and if anybody knows of a source where people are putting up pictures of their instrument panels, that would be great. I've got left side radios, so it's going to be a major surgery, but I'd be looking for help or suggestions.
Quick question. Are you putting a Ron and John's panel in where you're going to move that all around?
I'll have to look at it and see. I need to look them up and see what's available. That sounds like a pretty
That's
good
the
idea.
STC is a Ron and John's panel.
Okay.
And then do you want to move to center stack radios? Are you planning on going all glass? Are you going to do the 6-pack?
Yeah, I won't do all glass. I mean, you know, I'll do some glass, I'm sure. But
Like,
I have,
yeah, like G5s or 275s.
and the hang up is the autopilot situation. So I talked to Garmin, and they took it off of their reserve project list and say they have no plans on certifying that for us. So it seems to me it's Trio, True Track, and a 3100.
The 3100 just got approved here a couple days ago because I have a 250 with manual flaps, and Garmin is not doing manual flaps. They're doing electric flaps. So I'll send you pictures of mine. I got a Ron and John's panel with 2 G5s and GTN 650 and the transponder and all that in the middle. I'll send you pictures of mine. If you can give me an email address or something, I'll get them kicked over to you.
Great, I'll put it in
Here.
the chat room.
Yeah, here's my email. Or okay, yeah, that's fine. If you want to put yours up there, that's fine. And I'll get some over to you here in a couple minutes.
Thanks.
Yep.
CJ, you say the production parts are being shipped for what? Oh, S-Tech. Yeah, when I talked to them a couple weeks ago, they said it was approved. So, yep.
Anybody else, go ahead and jump in when it's quiet to say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
I'm Bill Hicks. I'm in Walsenburg, Colorado. I fly a Comanche 260.
Welcome, Bill.
Thank you.
Ed Cullen from South Lake, Texas, where it's a little chilly. And I've got a 250 Comanche, and I'm desperately looking for my Trio autopilot because I have none now. I'm ready for a good show tonight.
Good.
Don Pitts, Lovington, New Mexico, a 260B.
Don, you're not originally from New Mexico.
Well, we didn't say originally, but that's where I've lived since 1969.
Well, I'm John Westerfield from Coleman, Alabama, and I frequently fly out of Houma, Louisiana. So I love my C model Comanche.
Okay, I'm going to share some stuff here for you. This is the Northeast Comanche Tribe's website, and that's how you get there, northeastcomanche.org, right up here. On the website, there's a page for ComancheZOOMs that has the links at the top here to go to various things like the swap shop and the short Zoom things, the recordings for 2021, also the recordings on a separate page for 2020. There's a whole bunch of them. Go look for them. And then the future one. This is going to get changed probably tomorrow, but this is kind of what we're looking at coming up. Tonight is this one, Surviving Catastrophic Engine Failure. Another thing we're going to be talking about tonight is this new page here, the links in the back. In particular, there's the link here for Sun and Fun right here. And this is what it looks like. The idea is to give us as much information as you can about what you are and who you're going to be. If I click in here, it knows who I am, so it'll fill in all the blanks for me. So you get your name, your address, your town, stuff like that, cell phone for contact and email, and then the aircraft that you fly. I've got a 250, and the N number right there, the year, in my case, is a 63. I'm gonna actually go in on the day before and leave the day after. So you have a choice on the dates. The general route of flight, I've already got that in there, so there it is. And then whether I'm gonna have a ride share, yes, I will share the ride. I don't need a ride. I have 2 seats available. I will be camping. I'm not gonna do a car rental. I'm not gonna do a hotel, and I won't be sharing the room because I won't be there. And then you click send, and it goes like that. I get it in the email, and we collect it and get it to Pat Donovan or whoever else is taking care of the registrations and logical parking, stuff like that. And you're done. So if you're going to ComancheTown, that's the way you do it. Any questions? I'll be around, so hang on. And I will stop the share at this point so I can go back to my job of letting people in.
Andrew Davey. I have a PA 24180, 1962 with an S-Tech 50 autopilot. And I'm thinking about going down to Sun.
Hey, I'm Colton Gibbs, and I'm from Lewisburg, North Carolina. I'm 19, and I fly 1964 Comanche 250.
Hey, we were just in Lewisburg yesterday.
Really? Did you stop at Triangle North?
Yeah, that's where we were. I spent the day in the terminal talking to the guy who pumps the gas. Saw the helicopters. There was a 182 came in and out. Yeah, it was a nice day. The only nice day this week is that he said it was going to be icing down there. Was it icing last night, this morning?
Yeah, it was supposed to get pretty icy last night and today.
Yeah, we had a pretty good day. We were in and out. I think we left at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's funny. If I'd known you were on, I'd looked you up yesterday.
Where were you flying to?
Oh, we just came from Westfield, Massachusetts. Came right down to Lewisburg, and we probably landed at 10 o'clock in the morning. We were in a barren, a beach barren. I was just flying as safety pilot, and so he was ready to go by 1:30 or so. We're off the ground by 2, right back to Westfield. pretty substantial headwind on the way back, tailwind on the way up, or on the way back. It's everybody that's going to Florida these days has got quite a bit of a headwind. Yeah, we had to stay down at 6,000 because the winds were too great. At I think 8,000, they were about 40 or 50, right on the nose.
Sounds like if you're flying south, you're flying uphill.
You know how it's always, to get to Florida, you fly 240 degrees for how many hours it takes, and coming back, you're flying 60 degrees for the same duration, only you can cut back by 2 hours or so. That's pretty easy flight. Stop now and then for some fuel.
Hank Spellman, Lincoln, Illinois. I fly a 1959 Comanche 250.
Good sound on you, Hank. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ray K, Madison, Wisconsin. I fly a 260 B model Comanche.
Good morning, Ray.
Good morning.
Jim Peters.
Sam McGill, Midland, Texas, 59 250 Comanche.
Robin and Nick from California, Northern California, 260B with 2 G5s and S-Tech 50. And we're starting to get serious about our IFR rating these days, and we're doing it together. So it's quite a chore. Also thinking about the SureFly. I know that's another topic, but if anybody's ever installed a SureFly yet.
Must be nice to have two of you working on IFR together. You can be each other's safety pilot.
Yeah, that's the idea. We're also building time that way as well towards our 40 hours.
This is Robert Klein. I've got a Comanche 180 that has the Electro Air electronic mag, and I really recommend it. It's a full electronic mag, and it adjusts for like 10 different variables, and I've been very happy with it to include a gallon an hour less fuel consumption and more manifold pressure above 7,000 feet.
Do you see any increase in your cylinder head temps?
The cylinder head temps do go up a little bit, but the EGT goes down because what's happening is the overriding majority of the gas is being burned in the cylinders instead of on the way out the cylinder. A couple of weeks ago, I was up at 775, and I looked at the 75% figures in the book, and I actually had more manifold pressure left than what was indicated there. So I just had a lot more power the higher up you go.
It wouldn't be manifold pressure though, because that's a measure of atmospheric. It's the other thing you're looking at, Robert. But yes, I know what you mean. There's more power. CJ's back, by the way. Believe it or not, I was getting a real-time update from the Trio Pro Pilot people on the progress with the STC. So, which looks like it's coming along well, and they're expecting the STC to issue in March. So the submission will go in this month. They're comfortable enough with their situation with the FAA that they're anticipating it in a month.
Hi CJ, have they mentioned if they're going to be doing it for the 400s as well? I remember when I spoke to them last, they weren't doing the 400s quite as confidently anymore.
Actually, you know what? Let me check. My understanding is that they were going to try unexpectedly. Initially, they were not going to include the 400s, and then they there was a last minute change to the install that looked like it would work with the 400s. And stand by, everybody. I might not be so responsive, but let me see if I can get a quick answer because there's enough 400 drivers here. All right. And everybody just say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
Hi everyone, I'm Adam Height from South Wales, United Kingdom, and soon to be Arkadelphia, Arkansas. I posted up photos of my business hangar actually opening in Arkansas. Not opening, but being built in Arkansas. First time I've ever seen it. So that's really exciting. And I own a Comanche 400 November 8502 Papa, and soon to be a second one, which is very exciting as well.
Hi, I'm Will Carpenter. I'm the presenter this evening. I am in Fort Stewart, Georgia, where I thought it would be warmer than it actually is. But I flew and am working on a PA-24 260, 1965, straight 260. So you'll see more of it in a little bit.
Good to see you, Will, and thanks for being with us tonight. And everybody, y'all join muted, so feel free to just hit your unmute, jump in, say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
We got about 5 minutes or so until the presentation starts.
My name is Wheeler. I'm in Northwest Atlanta, Georgia. I'm at a KRYY. Recently just bought a PA-24 180. My brother and I are partnered on.
Sam, congratulations and welcome to the wonderful world, particularly of the 180, which I'm rapidly falling in love with. Sorry, Dad, I do love our 250B, but great birds.
Joe Androwski, Wanakee, Wisconsin, 65-260.
Joe, good to have you, and thanks for being here. Great bird in the same year as Will's.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I'll step in. It's Dave Shaver. I've got a 65-260 that I co-own, and we've had it for 26 years, and I'm in Maryland, fly out of Martin State.
Dave Shaver, class act. Good to have you, and thanks for joining us tonight with another 65-260, which I believe had the best bang for the buck of everything because they made it a little heavier when they went to the 66 and later.
I don't know. I make it a little heavier when I get in it, I think.
Good to keep our senses of humor on that one, right?
Oh, yeah.
Just keep it light. Come on.
Hi, I'm Diana.
Turn on your.
I didn't mute it. I did unmute. I'm Diana. My husband Bill and I have a 61-260. We're
Diana, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Glens Falls, Massachusetts.
Diana, it is a pleasure to have you. And you're in Glens Falls, did you say?
No, we fly out of Turners Falls, Massachusetts.
Out of Turner's near Orange, yes, where they used to have one of the best restaurants on the field, and then it closed.
Oh,
Yeah, there are a lot of good ones around.
yes, there are some very good ones around.
Barry Hiller.
Yeah.
Barry Hiller had a wonderful one, but also closed.
Yeah.
I just heard today that the restaurant in Nashua is going to be closing at the end of March because the state decided not to renew the lease.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah. 5 years they were there, and now they're out.
So now it's a $500 hamburger.
You know, we might need to do a Zoom on all the ways we've been able to save our local airport restaurants, because this might need some activism. Well, thank you for joining us, and thanks for being here with us tonight.
Hi, this is John Futter from Greenfield and from the Orange Airport, 1969 260C. Hi, Turners Falls. Welcome from coming in.
Do you guys know each other? Because you guys are like 10 miles apart.
Right. No, I don't.
Aha. You guys need to, do you guys both know how to use the chat window? Because you could swap info.
Okay.
That's got to be two Comanches right there on the same field. Because Simpson owns one there too, on Turner's.
Should be, and Josh is probably coming on shortly as well.
Yep.
We're gonna have a whole cluster from Western Massachusetts.
Oh, we actually share Josh's plane. We have it together. So.
Oh, there you go.
Yes, two sets of people, one plane.
Gotcha.
Beautiful. How many people want to ComancheZOOM on partnerships? I've been thinking about this.
I would be open to doing that, as I had a share in one in the UK as well.
Beautiful.
Hi, my name's Jeremy Shields. I'm from Collingwood, Ontario, and we're flying a 64-250.
Oh, outstanding. You're welcome, Jeremy, and you have the company of many Canadians tonight. Thanks for being here with us.
All right, of course, my pleasure.
And
I'm Mike Meadows from Houston, Texas, where I've still got some power, miraculously, and fly a twin Comanche.
Mike Meadows, if that is your twin Comanche on the screen behind you, she is a stunner.
It is, thanks.
Well, welcome, and happy to have you this evening.
Hi, everyone. It's Paul Smolinski. I'm from Yorkton, Saskatchewan, and I have a partnership with a PA30, and I have the picture up on my screen, and which had it painted about 2 years ago.
That is gorgeous. Welcome, Paul, and thanks for being here with us.
Everyone, Jason Rosbeck. I'm out of Denver, Colorado, fly out of the Colorado Air and Spaceport, which sounds a lot more classy than it really is. But I have a 60 Comanche 250.
Welcome, thanks
and
for
our
being here,
restaurant
Jason.
opens up on Monday. So
that's it. We'll all migrate to your restaurant now. We'll do like
Right.
$1,000 hamburgers.
Yeah.
Welcome,
My
thanks for
name-
being part of it. Go ahead.
My name is Mike Ellis, fly out of Moline, Illinois. I also have a 1960 250.
Mike, good to see you, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, this is
Hi.
Larry from a fly out of South Albany, New York, 1963 250.
Larry Sutliff, good to have you, and thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
Andrew Davey, I have a 1962 180 based out of Sullivan County Airport. And I have an STEC 50 autopilot in mine.
And Andrew Davey, I just want to say welcome. Thanks for being here. And for y'all, Andrew Davey gets credit for a couple of group buys that literally over 100 people have benefited from. So just a special welcome to Andrew. And thanks for your help with the avionics and the LEDs. And the LED one is still going on.
I got Frank looking at the 337s for the LEDs also.
Bravo. So yeah, it may get a lot easier to legally put a sunset or LED landing light into your Comanche. So stay tuned.
We are at that magic time of 7:30, so we got to get ready for the thing. I'm again going to mute everybody. And at this point, if Will hit his mic, we can turn it over to him and we can have the presentation.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, see if I can. Pete taught me pretty well, so I won't try to mess this up too bad.
I would suggest to everybody that you also go to the speaker view. That way you'll see him up close and personal.
There we go. Awesome. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Will Carpenter. So this is going to be the first in a series, and it was actually, the idea was conceived by Malcolm Dickinson, kind of massaged and perfected by CJ, Pete Morrison, all the Northeast Tribe leadership. So I appreciate this opportunity. But this is kind of the first one in a series, and it's I'm going to basically tell the story of, with some background information about, the aircraft and myself, my experience, the flight plan for that day, the phases of flight, that I experienced, my assessment of the damage immediately afterwards, and then just going to go through like a very candid discussion of the mental toll that all of this kind of took on me over time. And then the next in the series, which will be next week, we'll go through the aircraft recovery process. It's something that a lot of people are not familiar with. And I think the only people familiar with it are those that have done it for somebody else or those that have done it for themselves. I've learned a lot from it. Hopefully I never have to use that knowledge again, but I can at least, pay it forward, and hopefully you all can learn from what went well for me and what, could have gone better. And then the next one, which will be not the week after, but a few weeks later, is the rebuild process, which is kind of going through, because the transport of the plane requires the disassembly of it, and then you have to put it all back together, and then at that point you kind of start scratching your head and wondering if you're going to, what you want to upgrade, what you want to change, because the insurance company is footing the bill for a lot of the labor to get the plane apart and put it back together. So you can kind of try to piggyback on some of their expense and save yourself some money. So I'll talk about that. And then the last one is another one that nobody really deals with until they have to, which is dealing with an insurance company. It's a very foreign process to anybody who hasn't done with it or anybody who doesn't work in the industry. I knew nothing about it, so I'm going to share my experience. So this is probably going to be the longer one, but there's 3 more to follow. I am going to ask, just because there's a bit of material, if you have questions, please throw them in the chat or write them down, and then we can go through them at the end, just to keep the flow of the presentation going. I'm just gonna ask to hold the questions till the very end. So this is in front of you right now is my 65-260. It's 8807 Papa, and then it is looking at the southbound lane of Interstate 95 in St. Paul's, North Carolina. Not the best place, but for it to be, but it's there. All right. So just a brief background of me. I picked up my private pilot certificate. I'm 30 years old. I picked up my private certificate in 2008, my instrument rating in 2017. My high performance I actually picked up when I started flying Comanche at the beginning of 2020. You can see my total times there, and those were pretty much the times I had going into the accident, because the accident flight was only about a half an hour. You can see that almost all of my complex time, I guess even my retract time, was done in this Comanche, and I'd flown it a considerable amount, pretty much taken it everywhere I could. As far north as Rome Airport in upstate New York, and as far south as Leesburg, Florida. So I've taken it on very, very long trips, and it's been a great aircraft. So here's me. This is me, my wife Marcy. That's our daughter Piper, named after everybody here knows who that's named after. And then there's my son. He's named after the late great Glenn Curtis. His name is Curtis. And then of course I kind of went all in on his name, and my wife agreed to let me name him Curtis Wright Carpenter. So he's born to fly. So I think it's useful to understand what I had in front of me at the time of the incident. So that's why I threw this slide in here. So it's I haven't really, I'm looking at it now. I haven't touched really any of it since I purchased the plane, and I purchased it in 2019, had some work done on it. And I guess I purchased it in November 2019, had some work done on it, and actually did the delivery flight MLK weekend with Malcolm Dickinson, who's in the Northeast Tribe, of 2020. So this is the layout of the panel. It's not the way I would have set it up, but it's what I had in front of me, and I hadn't planned on doing significant upgrades. I planned on taking kind of the piecemeal approach, but that all kind of got accelerated. So, the first thing I had was an EDM 700, which is very relevant because this was a catastrophic engine failure. You'll notice that it is pretty much where the co-pilot's left knee is. It's a terrible location. I never would have put it there, but that's where the previous owner put it. So I wasn't going to go through the hassle of moving it. So I just lived with it and just made it part of my scan. Made it a very big scan, but that's what I did. There's a Apollo GX50. You can see that above the narco radios. It's a pretty basic IFR en route GPS. It's capable of doing RNAV approaches, but it doesn't have the ability to do LPV approaches or anything as nice as that. But it got the job done. You got the narco radios. There's an STEC 20, which is, the turn coordinator that you can see at the center, top center of the screen. And another very poorly placed piece of equipment is the 60 pitch stability system, which you'll see is right below the, throttle mixture and prop control. And it happens to be exactly where the telescopic emergency gear extension ends up. So if you actually have to extend your gear and you're not paying attention, you'll slam your knuckles right into that thing. So that is on the that's on the agenda to relocate that, because that is an absolutely terrible place. The plane also has a sky beacon, because I used to fly in and out of Savannah, so I had to get through the Class Charlie airspace. I had an iPad Pro that I mounted on the yoke that I tethered to ForeFlight. Excuse me, that I used. I had ForeFlight up, and I tethered it to a Stratix that I put on the window right next to me. And those are probably two of the most important pieces of equipment I had on the plane, and they, are not even part of the panel itself. They're just kind of my own additions. So this is the flight plan for the day. So it was on November 5th, 2020. My wife's birthday is November 4th, 2020. So it's a really easy day to remember when it happened. Just easy for her too, I guess. So the flight was supposed to take, it was going to be from Fayetteville to 28 Juliet, which is the second to the last dot on the bottom before the destination. It was a fuel stop. The fuel there was considerably cheaper than where I was. I was planning to take off with the mains full. It was just me in the plane, and I was going to go direct to 28 Juliet, which is I think it's called Palatka Airport. And then I was going to finish my trip onto Leesburg. I was going to go pick up my wife and kids. They were down at the in-laws while I was doing some training. My estimated time of departure was around 3 p.m. and I filed for 4,000. The winds are a little bit more favorable than 6, and I figured, my reasoning at the time was it'll save me a few minutes. So I wasn't running into like the evening or anything like that. I had actually arrived in Fayetteville the night, in the evening, when it was dark out, probably 4 days prior. I'm in the Army, and I was up there at a course, and I was, I dropped my wife and kids off in Florida in Leesburg, and then I'd flown up to Fayetteville for the course. And this is just the second part of the trip. The total flight time was going to be about 2 hours, 45 minutes. So it was going to be about 2 hours, 15 to 20 minutes to Palatka Airport, and then another 20 or 30 minutes on to Leesburg Airport. So I had, get there ice wasn't a factor. My course wrapped up probably at about 11 or 12, and I kind of just moseyed my way to the airport. I got lunch. I wasn't in a hurry. I was by myself. There weren't, my kids weren't there, which is usually a distraction. Anybody who tries to fly with kids a lot. And I just filled up the main. The only reason I didn't need to fill up the mains, but I decided, because they weren't really, I didn't have that much fuel taken out of them, but I made sure that they filled them up as much as they could, because Signature had some handling fee. It was like $30. I was like, I'm not going to pay $30 for and not get fuel. So I just went ahead and, bit the bullet and bought their fuel. The weather was severe clear. There was no forecasted weather between me and my destination anytime, probably within 2 hours of my departure or my arrival. So that was not even a factor. And I had plenty of sleep the night before, so I wasn't fatigued. Like I said, it was a very easy, it was just going to be a fun, easy flight along the way. So this is 07 Papa, beautiful plane, well loved by the previous owner. I think he owned it for 20 years, and he never let it spend a night outside. And you can see the paint shining on the cowling. That paint job is from 1979. So that's how much this guy loved on it. And I tried to do the same. It's got 4,600 hours total time in the airframe, 630 hours since a field overhaul, which occurred sometime in like 1999 or 2000. I only cite that it's a field overhaul because to the best of my ability, that's the only thing I can trace the engine failure back to. Because there weren't any indications that this was going to happen. I even looked at the cylinders had been, the compression tests have been done, the cylinders have been bore scoped, the A&Ps looked at it. I looked at it, and everything that I could find, everything looked clean. There weren't any issues with the cylinders. And that was at the annual that was done in September of 2020. So it was just a couple months before the engine failure. I said I purchased it in 2019. I had a pre-buy done by Tim Talley down at Clifton Arrow. I'm sure there's several people in this group that know who that is. I don't mention his name to like try to assign blame or anything like that. I guess the point I wanted to get across was that you can try to do everything right and take care of your plane and do your inspections and everything. And sometimes you just can't forecast the things that'll go wrong. Because he checked it out. He found a number of discrepancies that we addressed at the time of the purchase, and some things that I took care of later myself. But he was an exceptional guy to work with. Caught a lot of stuff. Very grateful. And like I said, my point is just to say that you can do everything right and things can still go wrong. The plane actually has a pretty colorful accident history. If you look in the FAA records, so in 1965, it ran off the runway on a landing, a really bad landing. I tried to imagine it from the write-up, and the write-ups are usually pretty poor, but it was deemed a total loss. I think the wing got pulled off. It was pretty bad, but it was recovered, and the plane was actually repaired extraordinarily well. When Tim Talley looked at it, I gave him all of the records from the FAA and any insight I got from the owner about the accident history, and he kind of zeroed in on those things, and he said he couldn't really find much evidence of it. He said you could tell some of the skins were newer, but he said it didn't look like it's not like it had been patched up or installed improperly. After 1966, there was a belly landing. The plane again was repaired by a pretty reputable shop in Hagerstown. Again, done pretty well. And then a jack went through the wing while they were working on it in I think it was around 2017. And the owner had told me that the insurance company paid out about $18,000 to get the original Piper skins back on it. So the plane has been well taken care of, well maintained, by all accounts. So it's hard to pinpoint the actual failure. And like I said before, I had flown it over 100 hours in 2020, and I had never identified any major performance issues. The plane always flew really well. The only time I had any issues was after I had a shop right when it came out of annual. Everything looked fine, on the walkthrough. I kind of expected everything. Even the engine monitor looked fine. And then as soon as I got off the ground, the engine monitor starts giving me all these warnings. Circle back, land immediately, and one of the it was the number 3 fuel injector line had been reconnected, or maybe it was just hand tightened. That was the only time there were any performance issues that popped up. But even after that, the cylinders were all bore scoped again. Everything looked great, and the plane performed very well, and I felt very comfortable with it. Okay, so now we get into the departure. So no issues that I could identify. I had been chasing a sporadic reading on the number 6 cylinder, and I had a sporadic reading on my number 2 cylinder, and I went ahead and pulled the probe out, cleaned it, put it back in, and I had been having that issue with number 2 for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And then the next time I took it up for a flight, the issue with number 2 was resolved, but now the issue with number 6 started popping up, and it wasn't as erratic as the number 2 cylinder, but it was still there. But even that being said, there were no issues identified on this flight. I kind of had thought that the issue resolved itself at the time when I was doing my run up, because I didn't notice any issues at all with the number 6 cylinder. I was actually kind of happy about it at the time. And then, so I departed runway 4 out of Fayetteville, and I made a left turn out, and I'll show you the tracking information from ForeFlight, which shows the specific flight path. Now, the thing I did compare, I checked and double checked the difference between the ForeFlight track log and FlightAware, and based on my recollection of the altitude settings on or the altimeter settings, the FlightAware actually gives you a better estimation of your altitude, but it doesn't track your flight path as low to the ground as the Stratix does. So I use the data from Stratix, knowing that the altitudes are maybe a couple hundred, maybe 200-300 feet higher than they would have been, or than they actually were. So just with that being just keep that in mind as you're looking at this information. So I actually climbed to 4,000, leveled off, set, power settings to cruise, lean the mixture. It was a little bit bumpy. So I asked ATC if I could climb to 6, and they gave it to me. I figured if I was going to be sitting there for 2.5 hours, I wanted to at least be in smooth air and not be kind of bumping around. But when I initiated my climb, I decided, to the best of my recollection, I decided to just pull the yoke back, and I didn't input any more power just because I didn't want to have to wrestle. I don't really know why I did that. I just did that just to keep a very gradual climb. And I wasn't in a hurry, so it didn't make a difference to me. So when I got to 5,500 feet, and I was thinking about this last night when I was like reliving it in my head. I think I had cookies with me or like a snack or something. And I was thinking about like, okay, once I get up to 5,500 feet and I get my cruise setting in and everything set up, I'm going to grab those cookies or whatever was next to me in my backpack. Didn't get to do that because when I got to 5,500 feet, there was a sudden vibration, a loud bang, and oil just covered the pilot's side of the windscreen. It all occurred in less than a second. And I mean, the sound that it made is one that it's hard to describe. I'd know it if I heard it, but what it sounded like to me is that moment when you pull your mixture back at the end of a flight, and your engine's, it's starting to shut down because there's no fuel feeding it, and then there's just that like one last pop that the engine gives out. That's what it sounded like. It was just very abrupt, very quick pop, oil on the windscreen, and that's it. So now now I'm going into the descent. So I pitched for 100 miles an hour, and I said to myself, oh shit. And I just remember thinking, this can't be happening. Like you go through the moment of denial, like this is not happening, like this is it, this is the moment. And at that point the adrenaline starts kicking in and you're like, okay, what do I do? And the first thing I did was I pitched for 100 miles an hour because I remember during my training, Malcolm Dickinson had said, engine failure, pitch for 100 miles an hour. So I pitched for 100 and I immediately declared an emergency. And I said, I wish I could share with you the live ATC, but I wasn't able to get it in time before they, deleted it from their archives. But I said Fayetteville approach. I think I said Fayetteville approach. I have an engine failure. I'm declaring an emergency. And they responded, who has an engine failure? And I remember thinking like for half a second, like, that's a good question. Comanche 8807 Pop has an engine failure and I need vectors to the nearest airport. And they said, can you make it back? I said, I think they said you have Fayetteville at your 6 or at your 7 o'clock. You have Lumberton at your 11 o'clock. And at that moment, the most useful thing in front of me was actually the iPad that I kept up for flight with the Stratix in the glide ring up. And I looked down and I could tell that those two airports weren't even close. I mean, I didn't have a chance. So immediately I said, I can't make either of those airports. I'm landing at one of these private strips beneath me. And I asked them to kind of like guide me to them a little bit. I asked them for the runway headings just to try to identify these things, because trying to identify a grass strip that you're right on top of in an emergency is less than ideal. And so that, I mean, that was, the decision of where do I land? That was the first thing I wanted to figure out. Once I figured out that I was I think I had settled down to 2 airports and I just was frantically looking for them, but I found one. And as soon as I found it, I mean, that's like the one time you wish you're flying a Cessna and you have a high wing, so you're not trying to maneuver around, because I did not want to lose sight of that thing. So I started initiating a turn to keep sight of it. And then I, went through the process of, okay, can I restart the engine? And I remember looking up and I couldn't really see much in front of me, but over on the co-pilot side, it was a little bit clearer and I could see my prop was just dead. It was stuck. It wasn't even wind, it wasn't moving, it wasn't doing anything. And I was like, well, dead prop, oil on the windscreen, that's not an option. So, I mean, I didn't have the unfortunate luck of having to decide whether or not, like how to manage the situation from a partial engine failure, because I knew what had happened. The engine was dead as a doornail, it wasn't coming back to life. And then the next thing in my thought process was, okay, what do I do? What do I do with the gear and the flaps? And at this point, the fields I have are identified. I'm not trying to get to them. I'm trying to get down to them because I'm right above them. And I decided at the time to lower the landing gear because my reasoning at the time was, well, if I lower the landing gear, I won't have to worry about the fact that I'm only running on battery power, and I won't have to wrestle with an emergency gear extension if I need to later on. And I have the altitude to sacrifice. So I decided to lower the landing gear. And I mean, I'll talk about whether or not that was a good decision later, but that's what I did. So now the gear's down, and now I'm kind of going through like, you know, the fields identified. And this is like the moment I would say you probably have is like the calmest in the emergency. And that's when I start going through my mental process, like, okay, you know, what else can I do? And at this point, I'm trying to figure out, like, you know, do I continue to descend? Like, do I put flaps in? Like, you know, what should I do there? Well, in this situation, I was in the air, and I had never wanted to be in the ground so badly. So I decided to put some flaps in, and I was trying to get down, and I decided to put more flaps in, and I actually put the full flaps in. That was a mistake. I had done it too early, and I didn't have enough experience with the sink rate of a Comanche when you have the gear down and the flaps around, because it is super excessive. And I missed the timing on it. So I ended up trying to line up for my approach, and I had made what I would call my base to final turn, and realized I wasn't going to make it. And at this point, there was another, you know, panic mode sets in again. And, you know, I remember looking out, and I can see the runway in front of me, and I can see the trees. And at this point, I'm probably at about 1,500 feet. And on the approach end of the runway, there's, you know, these tall trees. And I look down at the bottom of the trees, and I can see the sun reflecting off of the ground. And I'm like, I'm not landing in a swamp. So I decide, I make the impulsive decision to retract the flaps, and I start turning hard to get, to configure myself. Because what I was originally doing, and you'll see this on the video, is I was going at a heading of, the runway heading was almost, it was like 010 for the approach I was initially lining up for. But when I realized that wasn't going to work, the next best option for me, I remember, was a bean field. I found out it was a bean field later that I was flying over. But the approach for that field was at about 090. So I had to make a left-hand turn, you know, 270 degrees to complete the circle to get back to that approach in a very short period of time. And then, so I end up, you know, turning hard, making a left-hand turn to get like my base to final to come into this field. And I am, you know, banking hard to the left. My right rudder is in the floor. I'm trying to slip as much as I can to lose as much altitude. I'm also trying to keep the speed of my inside wing up, because at this point, I'm deathly afraid of a stall spin. So I just did the best I could to hold the plane, keep the airspeed up, you know, keep the slip going as much as I could, and to get the plane down with the usable runway I had. Well, I guess the improvised runway that I had created. And then once I had got down into the flare, another factor that came up that, you know, nobody ever trains for is the fact that I have oil all over my windscreen. And the normal sight picture that I'm used to seeing of like the runway and, like, you know, configuring how far I am off the ground and setting up for that approach, I didn't have that. So now I'm like trying to look out the space between, you know, the door right next to the pilot, the window in the windscreen, to see if I can see out that way in front of the wing. What I ended up settling for was I'm holding the yoke with my left hand, and I have my head pretty much in the co-pilot's, where the co-pilot's lap would have been, to try to see out their side of the windscreen, to try to gauge how far I am off the surface. And then as I'm coming in during the flare, I look out the window, I realize that there's a highway perpendicular to the end of my runway. And I had made the decision at this point. So I'm going, as soon as I get all three wheels on the ground, I'm going to lock the brakes up, because I don't want to make, you know, my emergency into somebody else's emergency. So that's what I do. And I drag the brakes, I drag the wheels all the way through this field. And then as I approached the fence to, you know, go onto the 95, or the berm that goes into 95, I turned a little bit to the left to try to give myself a little bit more distance. So this is the flight path you can see. So I did a zoomed in version and a zoomed out version. So I took off, made my left-hand approach, and then I actually stopped this little, I guess, what do you call it? The foreflight, like the track of the flight. I stopped it right where the engine failure occurred. So I actually was able to successfully break off the approach and pick the runway. I was trying to land at 61 November Charlie. Wasn't going to happen. So I ended up breaking off the approach, you can see. And then I put this other image over here on the right to show you the altitude and the ground speed. So the altitude I actually was up to was 5,500 based on my altimeter, which is agrees with FlightAware, but this altitude, the altitude setting here is a little bit higher. So it's somewhere between 59 and 5,500 feet is when the engine gave out. But it was a pretty consistent descent all the way down to the surface, and then you can see my speed, my ground speed along the way. And then the next one is I zoomed in towards the final moments of the flight. So you'll see the plane. I'll play this video. It comes along here, and then I try to stop it right about when I'm going to break off the approach. And then I'm doing obviously a circling to come into this field, but I broke off this approach. Continued to turn around, turn right, and then came left. I honestly don't even remember doing this right-hand turn. It must have been impulsive. I don't know, but the things I remember are right here and right here the most. So I'll play this video and you can kind of see my altitude going along here. So I was at about somewhere between around 1,000 feet when I broke off the approach. So not a lot of altitude, but it worked out. And then this purple thing here, just for your situational awareness, is the shelf for the Fayetteville class Charlie airspace. One of the interesting things is, as I was coming in here, as I was doing this circle, I remember at one point Fayetteville approach had told me they were going to cancel my IFR clearance, and that just sent a panic to me. And I was like, no. I was like, no. I was like, I'm staying with you. And they're like, no, don't worry. We're just canceling the system. We're going to stay with you. And I was like, okay. And then they asked me if I could take down a phone number. And in hindsight, like, what a ridiculous request. But for some reason I obliged. And of course, as I'm writing down the phone number, some other pilot steps on the area code, and I start frantically yelling for the area code. But in the future, I will not be taking down phone numbers when I'm dealing with an in-flight emergency. I would suggest that you all do the same. But I will say that all the pilots up there that day were very professional. It was only a new guy jumping in on the frequency, but ATC was great. They did their best they prioritized me. They made everybody kind of stop talking. So good job, Fayetteville approach, for taking care of me, and all the other pilots up there for helping me out. And I even remember when I was on the ground before I powered down, I could still hear pilots talking to Fayetteville. And I don't know why I thought I would still reach them, but I figured I'd try. And then, so I didn't get them, but some other pilots said, hey, we can relay your message. What do you need to say? And I said, tell them I made it on the ground. Tell them, Comanche 807 Papa made it on the ground safely, and I'll be evacuating the aircraft. And that was the last transmission, and I shut the plane off. So this is the approach end. So just to give you a little orientation, I was coming in from the right here, and I was banking hard, and I was coming down this way. And the plane actually touched down right at my feet. So I'm going to turn around and show you. I took a picture. I basically took this one, I turned around and took another one. So you'll see where the plane actually went. But I was coming in from the right. The Southern Comforts Aerodrome is actually, off to your right here. You can't see it. It's beyond these trees, but this was the biggest portion of the field that I could get to. So this, just to give you an idea of my airspeed and how fast and how high I was coming in, because I didn't want to stall a spin. This is how much of my runway that I used up. And honestly, I think it turned out to be a blessing, because walking over this field, there was pretty substantial holes. It was a bean field that had been cultivated about 2 to 3 weeks prior. And there's pretty big holes. And, one of the things you don't think about, in the moment, you don't think about until after the fact is, my plane ended up right next to 95, but the nearest road was this one way back here. So I had to walk like 3/4 of a mile to get out of this field. And I got out of the field and I forgot something. I had to come back, and I'm like, this sucks. I should have landed the other way. But anyway, it worked out. And I say that jokingly, because I think the other way would have been worse. And, to the people that live here, when I walked out of the field and asked them, who owns this field and where am I? They were a little bit skeptical at first, but they did do me a favor, and they did compliment my approach and my landing coming in. So they said, you know, from a non-pilot's perspective, they thought I did a pretty good job. All right. So this is where the, you know, just turning around here, this is the touchdown point. You can see the 3 wheel marks in the dirt, and then you can see 95 off in the distance. Now, what I did was I used Google Earth, and you know, I'm in the Army, so I obviously used my pace count walking to the plane from here. And to my best estimate, the ground roll was about 600 feet. And there's probably an error rate in there of like maybe 50 to 75 feet. But from the touchdown to the plane coming to a stop was about 600 feet. And I put that out there because that could be useful information for anybody else when you're estimating how much space you need. But I mean, as you can see from, you know, this image to this image, I used a heck of a lot of the runway just coming in for the approach. And I touched down probably 2/3 of the way down my runway. And you can see it's actually, when you look at the ground, it's pretty smooth here, surprisingly. It's much bumpier. It doesn't really do justice when you're looking at these pictures because, you know, the A&P that came out to look at the plane and who's working on it now told me, you know, he's like, I don't know how you missed some of those holes in the field. He's like, I don't know if you're lucky or you're skilled. And I said, I think I'm lucky, skilled, and I think somebody else has helped me out. It was not my time to go because there were some serious holes that you had to look out for walking in and out of that field. Okay. And then this is where the plane came to rest. So this is what, you know, I did a damage assessment after the fact, and there really was very little damage to the airplane. You know, as soon as I got on the ground, I made that radio transmission and ran out of the plane like it was on fire because I didn't know. And then, you know, as soon as I got out, I remember calling my wife and saying, because she'll track me on FlightAware just to see when my arrival is. I was like, hey, you know, I had engine trouble leaving Fayetteville, had to land in a field. I'm okay, but I got to go. I love you. I'll call you later. And like that was the end of my conversation. She's like, okay. And of course, I love my wife, but she calls my parents. She's like, Will crashed. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my mother's going to have a heart attack. But, you know, they called me and I was like, I'm fine. Just, you know, as a pilot, you say this is an off airport landing. It was just an emergency. It was not a crash. But the only damage to the plane actually after the insurance adjuster came out and looked at it was some of the antennas on the belly of the plane had been knocked off. And that was primarily from this thick grass. It's like it feels like sticks coming out of the ground. It's just not very pleasant. But yeah, I did an assessment of the plane. I walked around. I looked at the the wings, the underside. None of it looked like it had been substantially damaged. It wasn't leaking fuel or anything anywhere. And then, of course, you can see, just to give you a relation, I mean, the distance from 95, that fence that you can see to the plane is about 20 feet, and it's probably about another 50 feet from that fence to 95. So it's pretty close. This is just another angle. You can see, you can kind of see some of the oil on the windscreen. I'll give you a better picture of that in a minute. But it's really in pretty good shape. The gear held up. And then this is the oil on the windscreen. So, when I departed Fayetteville, I had 9 quarts of oil. And then when we checked the oil, after this, there were still 9 quarts of oil. So obviously it doesn't take very much for, you to be blinded by oil. One of the great things about the Comanche is there's this filler cap here, which creates a great vacuum for sucking anything. So the actual hole in the case is back here, but it all got sucked out and just, went all over my face. But this is the area I was referring to before. I was trying to look out to identify my, how much altitude I had when I was setting up my flare. So this is just kind of like a review of, things I would say I did pretty well. So I think I took charge of the situation early on. I mean, ATC is great. They're going to help you out, but you're the one that's, standing in the middle of the fire and you got to figure out how to get out of it. And I didn't really ask them permission to do anything. I just did everything the way I wanted to do it. I just took charge. I mean, I think that's what you have to do in an emergency. You can't, when your life's at stake, you got to make sure you're holding all the cards. So I think I used the resources I had very well. And mainly it was for flight. And, when something like this happens, you have to go through, I mean, it pays dividends to have an understanding of the systems in your plane. And what you have available to you. So the most useful thing I had was not even standard equipment in the plane. It was, my iPad sitting in my lap that was telling me, these airports around you, you're not going to make. But the moving map told me that I had 3 or 4 airports that were within my glide range. Obviously I didn't make it, and that's on me. Those are some of the mistakes I made, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. But yeah, ForeFlight, it was a godsend, and I will never fly without it. As long as they continue to produce it and I'm flying and I can afford it, I'm going to continue to buy it. I kept my airspeed up and I slipped very aggressively. I mean, the thing that, it's kind of like, as you're working through the different phases of the emergency, you kind of clear different hurdles. So it's like, okay, where am I going to land? Okay, I have that figured out. Now, how do I configure the plane? Okay, I thought I had that figured out. And then you get past these hurdles that you can kind of like in the boxes you can check off of your checklist, literally or mentally. But where I didn't want to lose the game, so to speak, was when I was coming in for my final approach. So I slipped the plane extremely aggressively. I don't think I've ever slipped it that aggressively before, but it worked out very well. And I actually landed gently and on a very smooth surface. So all things considered, when I remember getting on the ground and being like, that was a pretty freaking awesome landing. Like it would, sometimes the Comanches, like, when I first started flying, and I think like a lot of new pilots, there's a tendency like wants to bounce and do all these other things. When I put the plane on that field, I had never done a soft field landing in the plane. I was just trying to avoid it. I mean, pilots have different views on that, and that's fine, but I chose to avoid it. So for my first soft field landing, I think it went pretty well. And I miraculously found a very smooth and hard surface. Now, it looked smooth from the air, but it was when I got onto it, it was very firm, and it worked out very, very well. And I identified the runway. I didn't know what the composition of it was, but I'll take a little bit of credit for that, but I think there was quite a bit of luck in there as well. And I caused a little damage to the aircraft. Now, there's some antennas, and I'll talk about the damage to the aircraft that occurred after the plane was on the ground in the next one that occurred during the recovery. But I didn't do a lot of damage to the plane when I put it down. So more importantly, what could I have done better? So when I was in the plane, you go through these different like battles you do with yourself. And I wanted to be on the ground. I've never wanted to be on the ground so bad. And I sacrificed altitude by, slipping the aircraft, putting flaps in. I slipped it when it was higher too. I didn't do it a lot. I took some steeper turns to try to lose some altitude because I was just circling the field, but I just wanted to get down. Now, in this situation, I didn't have a fire. I didn't have any indication of fire. There's no smoke. There was really no reason for me to be in such a rush to get down. Now, I'm not sure if you guys caught it from the videos because I went over a little bit quick, but the time from the emergency, the engine failure to me being on the ground was about 5 minutes at 5,500 feet. And I think I probably could have stretched that out to 7 minutes based on the amount of altitude I had. If I had kept the gear up, kept the flaps in, flaps retracted, but I chose not to do that. And I think that was a mistake. And, if I'm ever in the situation again, or if any of you are in the situation, I would just encourage to not be so eager to get on the ground. So just fight the urge to do that, because, I remember taking a class, like a public speaking class, and this is related to like your cognitive process. So when you have an emergency like this, your body produces adrenaline. Obviously, heart starts pumping, and if you know that's happening, you can use it to your advantage, because what it does is it makes your cognitive process much faster, and you can take information and evaluate it much more quickly, which gives you the illusion of time slowing down. So even if I only gave myself 2 more minutes in the air, it probably would have seemed like another 10 minutes, and I probably would have been able to get through a lot of other things that I didn't end up doing in this emergency. I mean, I never even touched my checklist just because I was so anxious and wired, and I kind of lost control of my adrenaline. I should have kept the flaps retracted in the whole time and waited until the very end. They say you can either, I think that did me in. I mean, the gear might have been a factor in me not making the the Southern Comforts I think it's a aerodrome or airport. But I should have kept the flaps in. That was a mistake that I made. And I would encourage, if you're in the same situation, to keep the flaps in until like you are on like getting ready and the field mate, or just don't even put them in at all. And just slip the plane, use the slip and to get the plane down, and just say, I'm going to not use flaps at all. I should have kept the gear retracted till the field was made. I mean, at the time, my thought process was engine's dead, alternator's dead. I am running on battery power, and I don't want to be fumbling around with an emergency gear extension. So I made the decision to put the gear down early. I mean, did I need to do that? Probably not. I mean, I would say definitely not. My battery was going to last the 5 or 7 minutes I needed it to lower the gear. So I could have kept the gear up as well until I actually had it made. And I think it's a good warning point that if you do have an electrical failure and you're running on battery power, you have at least, I mean, every battery is different, but it probably ranges from 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how you manage your power consumption. But you definitely have enough power to lower the gear in 5 minutes. And that was a mistake that I made. And I wish I had not done that and had been more familiar with the system. And it's a learning process. And as you own the plane longer, you understand more of the different systems. I should have practiced engine out procedures more frequently. I'd probably practice in the plane maybe 3 times, maybe just one flight. I mean, it happens. I did it so infrequently that I candidly, I can't point to the last time. I know I did it during the transition training with Malcolm, and maybe one other time, but I couldn't tell you when it happened. So that's a mistake I made, and I could have practiced that more. I could have installed shoulder harnesses. This is one thing I didn't talk about when I was coming in for the flare, but one of my my biggest fears when I was coming in was I didn't have shoulder harnesses in the plane, and I was like, man, I really don't want my face to go into this panel right now, because that could kill me if I ran into something. And that was what I was so nervous about. I mean, I should have been focused on just flying the plane, but one of the things that was occupying like a part of my brain was, oh my gosh, I don't have shoulder harnesses. So they are being installed while the plane is being rebuilt, so I don't have to worry about that again in the same situation. And Malcolm Dickinson had told me to install them when he did the delivery flight, and shame on me for not installing them. I should have listened to him. And one thing I didn't think about at all is I didn't open the door. My CFIs had taught me that when you get an emergency, you have to do an emergency landing, you prop the door open in case the door gets jammed. I didn't do that. I mean, I wouldn't have had time to do it towards the end, but I think there's a period in there, and this is obviously case by case dependent, but I was at 5,500 feet, and there was a period between when I had the field identified and when I was setting up for the approach where, I was going through and assessing, like, can I restart the engine? Can I do, what can I do? And I could have opened the door at that point. I didn't, I forgot. I should have pulled the checklist out, but I mean, what I was focused on and what I had just kept telling myself the whole time, and it's super cliche. I mean, AOPA puts it out all the time, aviate, navigate, communicate. I was just like, I got to fly the plane. And I didn't want to do anything that would have taken my attention, even if it was reading a checklist. I mean, I looked at I was frantic. I mean, the only time I lost attentiveness to flying the aircraft was when I was frantically trying to identify the airport, when I was trying to find it. And as soon as I found it, I just started flying the plane again. So this is the damage assessment. On the top left picture, you're looking at the number 6 cylinder. There's that nice hunk of metal that came from the picture on the right. The picture on the right gives you a nice window. I could probably stick 4 fingers in there. You can just, play with the camshaft, but, and then you can see some of the connections of the top part of the number 6 cylinder. You can see this is image right, or picture right here. And then the same thing happened to the connecting point, like the connecting bolts on the bottom of the number 6 cylinder as well. And also it happened on the number 5. So, happened on the number 6 cylinder. And then I didn't get a picture of it, but on the number 5 cylinder, the same thing happened. Just a sudden stoppage, a lot of energy. and it just did a number on this case. And this is the original engine of the airframe that just been overhauled a number of times. But yeah, and the best assessment from the engine hasn't gone to Lycoming yet because it's the build process for a factory rebuild is like eternity. I think they mine the metal for the engine while after you place the order. But anyway, it's a very long time. So they haven't looked at the engine yet, but the A&P that's doing the work on the plane stuck a borescope into this hole and looked around, and he said that the connecting rod for the number 6 cylinder failed, and it looks like it just started whipping around the inside of the engine, and it saw the camshaft and it teed up on it, and it just went to town on it. You can see that right there. So that is why the engine shut down very suddenly. And then this is obviously where all the oil came out of. So my recommendations going forward, one thing that I was taught during my instrument training, and it's a product of complacency, is, I realized after this that I hadn't been doing a good job of, doing a emergency brief to my passengers. And I primarily fly with my wife and my 2 kids. And you saw how old my kids are. My daughter's 3.5. My son's almost a year old. And my daughter actually sits next to me, and my son sits behind me, and my wife sits kind of catty corner. And she serves as the number 1 stewardess in the U.S., trying to run interference on both of them while I'm flying the plane. She does a great job. But I hadn't been doing a great job of briefing my passengers on like, what do I need? Like, example is, what do I need my wife to do in a situation like that? I need her to, because, my son is still breastfeeding. So sometimes we get up at, in cruise altitude, she'll, breastfeed my son or whatever the case may be. But I needed to communicate to her, like, hey, something like this happens, I'm going to, hit the pilot isolate switch. I'm going to tell you, like, hey, you need to do this. Like, I'm going to give you orders. It's not to be, bossy. You just need to do it. She's going to have the responsibility of, reaching up and, opening the door. I'm going to have her practice that once I get the plane back. There's just a series of things that I have in my head that I'm going to make a mental note of it, and I'm going to write it down and give it to her and say, these are things that I need you to do in an emergency. And I had gotten complacent and got away from that after I got my IFR ticket or my instrument ticket, and I need to get back to that. I'd recommend every Comanche owner, this is mainly for the new pilots, the new Comanche owners out there, to practice aggressively slipping your Comanche. I mean, I slipped a couple planes here and there when I was, flying a Cessna or a 172 or a 28 PA-28 181. I mean, you do it because you practice it in those planes, but I found that in the Comanche, you kind of need to. I mean, from my perspective, sometimes if you ever get behind the plane, the easiest way to get back ahead of it is to just slip your plane and lose some altitude that way. But I think it's worth getting comfortable slipping the Comanche, and I had done it a number of times prior to this engine out, so I was pretty comfortable doing it. I'd never done it. I'd never cross-controlled the plane as severely as I did, on November 5th, but I had, done it to an extent. So I just recommend new pilots get comfortable slipping your Comanche. Another thing is that's worth doing is I have if you can, practice engine out procedures all the way to the runway. And what I mean by that is, I have the CFI that instructed me gave me all my instrument training. She flies out of Shenandoah Regional in Virginia. It's an uncontrolled airport, and sometimes she'll have her students fly over the airport at 4,000 or 5,000 feet, and if the conditions are right, meaning that there's no other traffic in the area, she'll give them an engine out and make them land the plane. Obviously, do it safely, but she gets them comfortable with the process of taking the plane all the way down to the runway and landing it if you don't have an engine. I think that's incredibly important to do, and it's good to do. And I say you should practice engine out procedures with somebody else too, because I mean, you can run through your checklist, but at a certain point it just becomes like a drill, and you don't really know. You need to get you need to set in the panic. I mean, a lot of the training in the Army is they try to they make you do a bunch of exercises or whatever to try to induce stress and then make you make decisions. I'm not saying anybody needs to be doing push-ups in their Comanche and then practice the engine out. Just have somebody in there to kind of like give you some training here and there, catch you off guard, just to keep you sharp. I think that could be very valuable and it could save your life. Another thing, this is kind of a weird recommendation, but if you have a situation like mine where you have a catastrophic engine failure, you get a hole in the case and oil comes on the windscreen, your visibility out the front is just gone. You just can't see anything. So it's worth, doing slow flight or even flying with another pilot and, trying to practice an approach where you don't have visibility in front of you, just because it's different. It's very different. I mean, I'm not suggesting anybody tries to land a plane with a hood on, but I think it's worth recognizing that is a possibility in, training it at least a little bit. Yeah, this is one thing that I definitely need to do is test out the Comanche sync rate. So there's a lot of information published out there about the glide range of the Comanche with the gear up, the gear down, the flaps up, the flaps down. With the if you pull the prop into your chest, that I couldn't do that. That was not an option for me. But just to practice those different configurations so you understand how the plane is going to react. And I was not comfortable at all. I mean, I was kind of like guessing and just doing my best guess. And then if it didn't work out, I had to, adjust very quickly. But if you can familiarize yourself with that before you get in the emergency, I think it'll pay dividends if you ever need it. And I think everybody should install shoulder harnesses. That goes into the next point of gear up, gear down. I mean, so I had originally put the gear down because I thought I had the field made. So that begs the logical question of I'm sorry? That raises the logical question of why didn't you raise the gear up and then land on the field? And I struggled with, why didn't I do that? And then it took me a while to realize that I didn't do that because I was afraid. And I was afraid because I didn't have shoulder harnesses. Because I was afraid that landing a plane on the dirt without shoulder harnesses, I would have knocked myself unconscious or worse. And so I decided to leave the gear down, have it try to absorb some of the blow, even if it totaled the plane by tearing a wheel off. I figured that was my best bet. Now, the studies are out there that say you should, unless you're landing on a hard and improved surface, you should keep the gear up when you land in an emergency off of an airport. And I'm not going to rebut that at all. I happened to get extraordinarily lucky with the field that I landed on. It was smooth, it was hard, and it saved me. But I'm just saying, it worked for me. And I'm kind of saying at this point, do as I say, not as I do, and listen to the statistics that say you should keep your gear up when you're in a similar situation to what I was in. This is kind of I'd call this like the will tells all portion, where I'll be very frank with you about, how this has affected me. The logical question comes up, do you stop flying? I mean, my wife asked me, she told me afterwards, like, if you wanted to give it up, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't question it. I support you, whatever you want to do. And I kind of told her, I was like, I can't do that. Like, it's just part of who I am. I'm sure it's the same for all of you. It's not something you can just easily walk away from. It's just a passion of yours. So one of the things I've struggled with is, there's the moment of the flight that I relive the most is it actually didn't even happen. And it's wild to think that way, but my base to final into I call it the bean field, into the bean field. I keep running through my head, like me being in the cockpit, seeing what I saw, and then it turning into a stall spin. It's like a bad movie that's just on repeat, where I'm coming in, banking hard to the left wing stalls, drops, spin, and then I'm dead. And that's just a very vivid memory. I don't think I'm ever going to get away from that. I just hope it falls far enough back into my mind that it's not an issue. I mean, so the 4 unforgettable moments of the flight, things that kind of get burned into your mind, and any of you out there that have engine failure will probably have similar moments that you will never forget. For me, it was with, the loud bang. And then it was the approach into the field, the first airport, realizing I wasn't going to make it. Then it was the base to final turn on the into the bean field, and then after that it was the flare where I couldn't see anything in front of me. So those are the 4 moments that I hold on to. Nightmares. Fortunately, I've only had one, and it happened a month or 2 afterwards. And I kind of woke up the next day and I was like, "Hey," told my wife, I was like, "Hey, I had my first nightmare." Doesn't obviously make her feel too great, but I've only had one, honestly, and it was just I don't remember it that. I think I've chosen to forget a lot of it, but it was being a pilot and getting into a crash. And then the next logical thing is is the fear that exists. And I would honestly say I'm not really afraid of flying a plane again. What scares me most is the fact that I'm not an A&P, and I'm an attorney for the Army. So don't hate me for it, the attorney part. But I try to make a point to understand as much as I can about the equipment that I'm working with, and knowing that the aircraft that I own and that I'm going to be getting back into just had the wings removed and put back on, just had the stabilator removed and put back on, just had the landing gear disassembled and reassembled, just had the engine removed, engine mount removed, had the new engine put back on. And it's like, it's a perfect storm, right? Because what do you have to do when you get a new engine? You have to run it hard for a couple hours. And it's like, you can't like ease the plane back into the air. You can't do like a high speed taxi. You gotta, kind of go all out. So, I mean, the shop that I've been working with has been extraordinarily helpful. And one thing I would put out to the group here, and this is just kind of like a shameless plug, the plane right now is in Wilmington, North Carolina. And if there are any, A&Ps out there that are in and around that area that are extraordinarily familiar with Comanches, that would, a self-avowed expert, or, you know the systems in and out from tail cone to spinner, please send me an email or send me a text, because I would love to employ you, pay you, cover your costs to come and just look over the plane. And the shop that the plane is with is actually, they're admittedly a Beechcraft shop. And I actually talked to A&P today, and I asked him, I said, would you care if somebody came and looked at your plane? He's like, absolutely not. He said, if it was a King Air we were working on, I would tell you you're wasting your time, because that's what we do every day. But he's like, we don't work on Comanches every day. So if there's anybody out there that would do that, it's in Wilmington, North Carolina, please just shoot me a message to help. I think that would give me more peace of mind as I, get back in the saddle. So going forward, luckily the A&P that's working on the plane, the director of maintenance up there, is a CFI, and he actually agreed to go on the initial flights with me to help me identify any issues and fix them right away. So that's a good testament to him. I'm going to change my flying habits after this whole incident, just for a couple different things. Look back at the situation, and some of these I didn't even have to go through, but I'm going to avoid night flying at all costs. And if I have to do it, I'll follow the highways. Because what I would previously do is I normally wouldn't depart in the evening, but I wouldn't mind departing in the day and then landing, a couple hours after it got dark. But I'm going to avoid that going forward if at all possible. Avoid hard IMC days, low IFR procedures. I had always been kind of a pattern altitude, like, if the weather's a pattern altitude, I'm comfortable there, maybe a little bit lower. But if it had been an IFR day when this happened, it would have been a completely different outcome. And these things are hard to normalize. And I know as I go through this, and I've talked to, CJ and Pete about this, and Hank as well, that, you never think an engine failure is going to happen to you. I was the same way. I was like, man, you read all this stuff, you read all these accidents. I mean, I would watch AOPA Safety Institute stuff. I'd read about just any kind of accident information I could read off. And my wife would always be like, why do you read that stuff? It's just so depressing. And I would tell myself, it's like, well, so I learned from the mistakes other people made, and I don't make them myself. But I never thought it would happen to me. And it's not real until it does. And then it doesn't take, it takes a while for it to set in, because even after it happened, I was like, it just seems completely unreal. everybody will always tell you altitude's your friend. I mean, the difference between my arrivals at 4,000 and 6,000 feet, or even like 6,000 and 8,000 feet, was probably on the mark of like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Not worth it. I will bite that bullet if I need to get more altitude, because altitude gives you time. And like I was saying, when your adrenaline gets flowing, time slows down. And if you can use that to your advantage, you want to use everything to your advantage. I'm always going to keep ForeFlight up with glide ring. If I would attribute one thing that saved my life above all else, and this isn't like I don't work for them, I don't get any kind of incentives or promotions or free subscriptions from ForeFlight, but the thing saved my life, and I'm going to fly with it, for the rest of my days. Don't hand wave the emergency procedures, and I guess what that means is there's a tendency when you go through, when you're doing your private training, your instrument training, and you get an engine failure from your instructor, you're just like, okay, I'm going to grab my checklist and I'm going to go through. It becomes very robotic, and it's you kind of lose sight with it. So I think it's worth, like I said, kind of trying to your best to instill some panic, and also to change it up a little bit, and add a little variety into your training. And this is just a personal thing that I'm going to do. I realize, of all the things that, you notice when you're facing one of these situations, I realize I have a picture of my family in the plane, and I'll never make that mistake again. I'm going to, even if it's an outdated one or an old one, I'm just going to tape it up somewhere on the panel. And that's all of the prepared material I have. So I think I don't know if CJ, if you want to be the MC and go through the questions, or, what approach to take from here. Or Pete, or
I just want to know if any of us are still breathing after that amazing presentation. I think half of us were in there turning blue. That was amazing, Will. Thank you so much. We do have a bunch of stuff in the chat window. Yeah.
It's my Comanche shirt. It's got the crest on the back, and I remember I had it on the day, so I was like, I'll put it on today.
Well, just get on over to ComancheTown and we'll get you your very own ComancheTown t-shirt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Even if you have to walk down with your family.
I know.
So no, we'll pick you up and bring you on down if they're not done with your plane yet. You're on the way. So there are a bunch of questions and comments in the chat. But just because we had talked about this, so we all do a Zoom test flight usually the night before everybody, just so that, we're all kind of on plan. And we were talking about the feeling that you get when it suddenly gets quiet up there. And do you, Will, want me to go ahead and ask people to just, before we jump into the questions, do you want to?
Absolutely. I think it's a very, very surreal moment, and it's different for everyone, but I think, I'd be interested to hear what everybody has to say.
Yeah. So if you have had that quiet moment in an airplane when you didn't expect it, if you can go ahead and unmute and keep it to 30 seconds and tell us whether your experience matched Will's. Was there that moment of, okay, I guess this is it, I'm probably dead. And then that moment of, I guess I'm going to do what I'm trained to do?
Chime in there. I've heard that quiet twice. And I can tell you his experience with one get downitis, because I was at a good altitude when I had both mine. And also the freak out when you move your line of sight and all of a sudden you feel like you're in IFR conditions because you can't see the windscreen. And it is the quietest quiet I ever heard in my life. And when I did manage to land the airplane on a paved runway, which was very, very fortunate, it's the first time I ever really heard the wheels roll underneath the airplane. And I tell you, that was a great sound. So there you go.
Thank you for chiming in. And one more question. How long did it take you to realize that this had happened and then start to think?
Oh, start the unscheduled glider time? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah,
but does that moment of how long did it take you to sort of come to sort of get past the, oh my, like, did that really just happen?
It was pretty, fortunately, and I say this is fortunate because when your engine just stops and there's oil on the windscreen, you're kind of steps ahead in the decision-making process. And actually, this might be controversial, but I think it's better in a situation like that because a lot of your decisions are taken away, which can lead you down the wrong path. Like, I'm going to stretch it out. I'm going to mess around and see if I can find the right mixture, this and that. Well, maybe I can get there with partial power. All that goes out the window. And that's just, so it was like, brum, brum, stop, splat. Okay, I don't think I'm going to try to restart this engine because it ain't turning out there in the slipstream. So I don't know if Will had the same kind of a wake up call, but it was kind of good because you just concentrate on getting yourself down safely. So it does eliminate a lot of distractions. No, it was almost an instantaneous transition, getting back to your original question.
Well, thanks for speaking up. Anybody else want to jump in?
TJ, can
Yeah,
I say?
I had a, yeah.
No, I'll just say I completely agree that it is nice when a lot of the decisions are made for you. And I mean, when you look at the track log for that flight, and it is, you know, I began my turn very quickly after the engine failure, and I didn't realize it had happened that quickly. I kind of lost track of that. I had thought more time had elapsed, but it was, again, I think it was just is time slowing down just because you're just reacting to what's happening.
Hank Spellman. It was almost 60 years ago now that I had mine, and the engine swallowed a valve. I still had a piece of an engine, but the best I could get was about I would say 350 foot per minute descent. There was no climb available. And I was over the flatlands of central Illinois, where all the fields had not been planted yet. It was in the springtime, and it had been raining a couple of days, and so I knew that if I landed in somebody's field, the airplane was going to go over. Didn't want to do that. I made a hard surface runway, happened to be my home runway, by about a foot. I mean, if that runway had been 1 foot further away, I wouldn't have gotten on it. I would have landed short. When it happened, my first reaction was, hey, God, turn it back on. This isn't happening to me. The thing I found most interesting was when I got it down and rolled to a stop on the runway and then had to push it a half a mile to get it off the runway. Fortunately, it was a very light airplane, wasn't a Comanche. I lost complete muscular control when the emergency was over. I could barely stand. I could barely walk. It was just total heebie-jeebies from the adrenaline rush.
I had a little different reaction with a catastrophic engine failure over the Northway, and just south of Albany. It made a lot of racket in the airplane, and then came to a stop. I had a chase plane because there was two of us, and they saw a quarter mile of smoke behind me, but they mentioned the Northway below me. But like Will said, and incidentally, Will, that was a great job with the amount of experience you've got. It's amazing what you did. What I did was just got busy. You know you're going to land, and so you think maybe I can make that I'm going to glide to the next airport. When that becomes a reality that you have no chance, then you look for a place to land. And, you know, in the process, you really have no time to get excited or get, you know, you've got to fly the plane. And so it's picking the spot to put the airplane down and doing the best you can. So configure the airplane like you did. the first thing is get your airspeed, pick a place to land. You can skip number 3, which is go through the checklist, because it's a catastrophic engine failure and the prop stopped in front of you. So the other one is declare an emergency. So I talked to the chase plane, and the last one is evacuation. I didn't do that either. I had a canopy, and it would have taken 2 hands to roll the canopy open, and I was too busy for that. But when you said put the gear down, I did the same thing. I put the gear down because I knew it was probably going to be a rough landing, and then I got the flaps down as well, because I wanted to be going as slow as I could comfortably be going when I got to the ground. When you get to the ground, it's just, well, how good did you do, and how lucky have you been thus far? Because now you got to ride out the airplane. Like you said, you had your feet on the brakes. Mine nosed over. It was a tailwheel airplane. It nosed over, and I had a long nose, so it didn't flip. But dug a furrow with the nose, and it stopped. But just short of the ground, there was a hedgerow right in front of me, and I knew I was going to take that hedgerow out. But it was amazing. I think the Lord's with you sometimes. When I got to the hedgerow, I went right through it without even slowing down. And then I landed, nice landing, nose over, dug a furrow, stopped within 100 feet. And so then the chase plane was overhead, and I was busy trying to get that canopy open, climb out, look for my iPad, which was on the floor at the time. But I didn't have any of those after feelings at all. To me, it was just when the engine fails, you know you're going to land. So now it's just make that landing. Yeah, it isn't a matter of a choice. You got to go through the setup, find a place, put it down, and then get out of the airplane. Great job, Will. I'm amazed.
George, I'm happy you didn't have any feelings, because I just went into total self-doubt that had I missed something with the engine, had it been running rough, did I do the maintenance? I just for a whole week, I just couldn't get it out of my head. You know, was I part of the failure path into this? So I'm glad you have the confidence not to go back and do that.
A couple of things I did is I had the cell phone, so I called the guy I knew at the FSDO, and I said, who do I call? Because I just ditched in a field. And he gave me a number. There's a telephone number that you call, because I wasn't talking to approach control. Fayetteville did a great job for you. I wasn't talking to approach control. I was just talking to the chase plane. And so he gave me a number, and it was Albany. The guy that was on, it was a Saturday morning at 9:30, a beautiful day. And I had just come across the Catskills. And so now I was in some open fields. Had it happened 10 minutes earlier, I'd have been in the foothills of the Catskills.
Not such a good place.
Yeah, it would have been a different story now. I'd probably still be in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
So I made the call to FSDO, and they asked what had happened. I said, I landed in the field. There's no damage to the field, no damage to the airplane to speak of. And so we'll remove the airplane. And we've got, in Westfield, Massachusetts, we have kind of a team that goes out and knows how to transport airplanes and that kind of stuff. But the chase plane
That's
landed,
the next Zoom.
the chase plane landed over at Columbia County. They got the courtesy car and came over and found me after a while. What I was trying to do was hide too, because I didn't want any excitement. I didn't want anybody to know about it. So I got out on the road and walked down, and I see this guy with a cell phone on his ear, and I'm going, oh no, you didn't call the authorities, did you? Because apparently he saw the airplane out there in the field with the tail up, And before you know it, there were police and fire department all over the place because they're not doing anything on a Saturday morning, and they love to turn the rotating beacons on and go to an airplane crash. And so they were all over the place. And so then they said, who's the pilot? And, you know, nobody looked like a pilot. You know? So trying to hide that fact too.
Left your boards at home, huh?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just, coming from a CFI of 50 years, George, and a commercial pilot still, that's quite a
Well,
story. Glad
you
you're with
know,
us.
That's why I'm so amazed, Will, at how you handled yourself in that situation. Absolutely. Applause. Applause to you, sir.
Well,
Yeah,
while you guys are talking about Westfield, about 16 or 17 years ago, my wife and 3-year-old son took off from Turner's Falls 0 Bravo 5 on a cold winter morning, and we were at about 5,500 feet when I thought actually that I'd lost the propeller tip because the whole front of the airplane started shaking, and neither my wife or I could even come close to touching any of the instruments. And she did the communications, and I just tried to fly the plane. The engine was rotating. It turned out to only be a valve that had stuck, but but there was oil coming out of the engine, and we're 5,500 feet and didn't declare an emergency because we could actually see Westfield Airport runway. I think it's runway 20 or 26, maybe, out the window.
It's runway 20.
And I played with the throttle a little bit, but every time I increased the throttle, it felt like literally the airplane was going to fall apart. And so it was. I kept the flaps up and the gear up right until I was pretty assured that I'd get to the field, and it's virtually a 6,000-foot runway. So I wasn't too worried. It was we put the gear down and then some flaps, I don't remember how much, and landed with fire trucks on either side of us and chasing us down the runway. And when we finally came to a stop, we immediately opened the door, got out on the wing, and my 3-year-old got out of the plane, and he was just elated. And he was absolutely so excited that this was going on, and kept saying, "Can we do that again? Can we do that again?" And I said, "No, that's not happening again." But so, yeah. And actually the other person that flies this Comanche was flying back from Vermont when he noticed a fog on his right side as he was getting into dusk, and thought he would avoid that fog bank, but the fog bank came along with him, and it was oil on the windshield. Ironically, from another stuck valve when he took off from Burlington, Vermont. But he got it back to Turner's Falls, and we ended up replacing the engine. So anyway, that's my story.
Happy you all are still here.
Is your son flying with you now?
Actually, my son is now 20 years old, and he soloed in our Cessna 172 before he got a learner's permit to drive, and so he loves flying. That although he's a little bit more cautious of off-airport landings and that kind of thing. He still doesn't have a pilot's license. He's a sophomore now at American University in Washington, D.C. And just while I'm on the what's sort of a subject, my wife, who's also a Comanche driver, is on ABC News tonight at 10 o'clock on ABC News Live, explaining the Perseverance rover landing. If you guys want to watch it, her name's Katie Coleman, and she's a former NASA astronaut. So.
And Josh, I have to confess that I was just boasting to the 99s that your wife and Miller Einzel's wife were both on here at the same time one day, and that you guys are both NASA astronauts, because I just thought that was so cool. So forgive me, but we had two NASA astronauts, both women, on our Comanche Zooms at the same time, and one of them was your wife. And I hope everybody goes at 10 o'clock on which channel?
It's ABC. I only got it on my computer. It's ABC News Live. And it's at 10 o'clock. She's doing a recap of the Perseverance landing. There's one
Katie
of the
Coleman.
John Grunsfeld is a retired now NASA astronaut who also had a twin Comanche for a while. Then he moved to an Aerostar, so he's not in our family anymore, but he's still a good guy.
Even though, well, that is super cool. And Marty Hench, who's helping with the Comanche Trio Pro Pilot project, works for NASA. And then Ryan Hammett is making sure that all those launches out of Kennedy Space Center, he's got a 250, are happening. He's their QC guy. So NASA's in the Comanche blood for sure.
Sometime I'm sure Katie would love to give a presentation, although it would be more NASA oriented than Comanche oriented, if anybody wants.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Josh will be in touch through John Futter.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yep. So before we go back to the questions in the chat window, and thank you for waiting for those. Will and I thought it would be interesting to collect people's reactions, that moment of discovery or realization when it gets quiet, and then sort of what went through your head next. And I'm going to jump to the chat window, but I figured if anybody else wants to jump in and just grab 30 seconds.
Yeah, I had one in a Piper Cub with my friend in the back who's also a pilot, and it was just on takeoff. We just got to the other end of the departure end of the runway and started losing power, and did a turn around to try to join a downwind to come back and land. And then we weren't climbing anymore. Then we were descending. Keith, we're going down. I know. We're both Sitka. Shoulder harnesses, and I had this really weird feeling that I was up here looking down on myself in autopilot mode. I'm a part-time flight instructor, so all of the checks and everything were very routine, and I was amazed that I wasn't sort of panicking, or after I landed, I was amazed that I didn't panic, or no dry mouth or anything like that. It was just everything kick in. And it seemed like forever. Time did freeze for sure. And then picking out the one place that I picked, we changed it at the last minute because there was a power line, and then landed in somebody's backyard. Not the world's best landing, but it was a nice, firm, short field landing. And then unfortunately on rollout, the last foot of the wingtip struck a tree. We whipped around a little bit, but the feeling of relief was amazing. But that weird feeling of not panicking at all just because of all the training kicked in was bizarre.
If there was ever an
CJ.
advertisement for training, I think you just made it. Thank you for saying that. Go ahead, sir.
CJ, it's Billy. Oh
yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
CJ, Ron Richmond.
CJ.
I've been
hang on for 1 second, Billy, Ron Richmond, and then Billy Brooks.
Okay, I've been flying for 75 years, and 73 years ago, I had my only engine failure. I was in a Fairchild PT-23 taking off from a farmer's field, and had a gentle right bank to go across some very tall trees just the other side of his field where there was a perpendicular road, and wham, the engine quit. And I was no more than 300, 350 feet. And without thinking and with no training, within 1 or 2 seconds, I reached down and grabbed the cross handle on the long rod that went from the front to the back cockpit that changed the tanks from right to left. And both of the tanks had said they had gas when I took off. And it turns out that the one tank that I had selected didn't have gas, and the gauge was wrong. And I learned from that experience on a walk around before flying, before getting in the cockpit of an airplane, I always check every tank by taking the cap off and looking in the tank. No more do I believe the gauges. So that was my engine failure. It started up almost immediately, and it had not gone clear down. It was only down to about 1,500 RPM when it took hold on the second tank.
On that story, interestingly enough, I was speaking with a very experienced Comanche specific CFII, George Richmond, and he reiterated exactly your message. Check your tanks, don't believe your gauges. Ron, it is a pleasure to have somebody who's been flying for 75 years here with us, and to have you share your knowledge. So thank you for your story, and thank you for being here with us.
You're welcome.
So,
and then Billy.
Yeah, CJ, this will be 30 seconds. About 24 years ago, I have a 180. I was trying to stretch fuel from Chapel Hill to Petersburg, and I knew I was running. I had at least 10 gallons in the other tank, but I let one tank run dry just to see what it would be like. When the tank ran dry, the engine was still turning, but it was a lot quieter, and the nose dropped. And then I thought, okay, switch tanks. And I switched tanks. Nothing happened. And then nothing happened until I hit the electric fuel pump, and then the engine surged back to life. But the guy that was with me, I said, JT, I think we got enough fuel to get to Petersburg now. And he said, you're landing this plane now. So we had an airport underneath of us, Emporia, and we landed. So.
Oh my goodness. Billy, that story is great for two reasons. One, because you got it and you're here with us today, which we're happy about. But the other is that the next week, Will Carpenter is going to talk about recovery, but the week after that, guess what the topic is?
Run out of fuel? What?
Nope, but it's close. How to run a tank dry.
Oh, how to do it properly.
How to do it properly, well, on purpose, especially if you're doing a long cross country. So yeah, good on you for making it and figuring it out, and thanks for being here with us. So, all right. We're going to take one last one if anybody's got it, and then we're going to go to the chat window questions, unless Will wants to step in and comment on the stories he's just heard.
I'll make a comment that I think it was George was talking about, after it happened, and, he's like, don't call the authorities, but he's right. Everybody and their mother comes out to look in a plane. I mean, mine was at, prime time because it was right next to 95. But first thing that happened, I ran out of the plane, like I was on fire, called my wife. And then within like 5 minutes, a helicopter lands in the field behind me. And I see on the side, it says like life flight. And I'm like, man, that was really quick. And, the 4 occupants get out of the plane, they walk over to me. And I made the comment, you guys got here really quick. And they're like, oh, we were just flying overhead and we told the ATC we'd come check it out. I was like, oh, well, I'm good. They walked around the plane, complimented my landing, and they're like, "You need anything?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then they took off. But yeah, and I just to kind of loop it into one of the questions I saw pop up was like, what happens with like the FAA and the NTC? I didn't know who to call, and actually another one of the CFIs that gave me transition training, David Asma. I saw him, pop a comment up in the chat. Great instructor, but I called him. I was like, "Hey, man. I just put my plane down in a field, and what do I do now?" And he's like, "Oh, well, you should probably call the insurance company, the FAA," and kind of like a level-headed person who's not high on adrenaline was like, "Yeah, you should probably do these things." And at this point, the FAA is like blowing up my phone. Everybody's trying to call me, what's going on? Where are you? And then of course, like the firefighter, like some paramedics show up on the highway, and then the fire department shows up, and then nobody shows up at the same time. It's like one person leaves and the next one shows up, and the last person to show up is the state trooper, and he takes a statement from me. And of course, like, I mean, love the police, but the article that was put in the paper the next day about what happened is totally inaccurate. He's like, plane crashes in St. Paul's, impairment is not suspected. And I'm like, what possibly gave you the illusion that I was drinking? But anyway, yeah, it is a very interesting process, and it is worth asking, keeping the number to your insurance company and the FSDO. It's a great number to have. But just so you know who to call when this happens, because I was kind of, up the creek without a paddle. Unfortunately, David threw me a life vest and kind of helped me get out of that mess. So shout out to him, down at another fellow Georgia pilot. But that's the only comment I'll make.
I was curious if your insurance company helped you out on the engine repair, or if they just blew you away on that.
I'll say stay tuned. They helped me out in a lot of ways. It didn't help me out in a lot of other ways. So.
Yeah, I did. When I had mine, I had like 0 damage to the airplane, and an engine that was so torn up. I didn't even get a core on the engine, and I was almost tempted to go out and just push the airplane into a ditch and tell them I'd crashed it. But it was quite a shocker to pay full cost to, because I not damaged my airplane. There you go.
I want to get a quick comment in here. A lot of people have been logging in partway through and in toward the end of the presentation. This whole thing is recorded, and by tomorrow midday, it will be available on the northeastcomanche.org website. So those of you that missed the beginning can look at it. In fact, those that sat through the whole thing can look at the whole thing all over again. And just as a side point, I've had about 50 engine out landings in the past year and a half, but they were in gliders.
Punchline.
How many off airport?
Only one.
And that was good. That was a good one?
That was fine. Ended up on the side of a tree.
Oh, great. Did you get damage?
Very little damage to the glider, mostly to my ego.
We have a rule in British gliding is every time you go gliding, you take a couple £100 in your wallet, and just to give to any farmers' fields whose crop you destroy when you land.
Yeah.
All right, over to the chat window. This is good though. So we've got 49 comments. I think a bunch of them are actually related to glide ratio, and so here we go. So some of it is really useful advice. I'm just going to go in order. But I do just want to mention that part of the reason for that question was to find out what people's mental states were and just for anybody, I do want to add one thing. I was the safety committee chair. I have gone through Comanche accident statistics. One of the rarest causes of accidents is a catastrophic engine failure in a Comanche. We have these ridiculously reliable, normally Lycoming 4 and 6 cylinder, and occasionally for you 400 drivers 8-cylinder engines. Fuel exhaustion and fuel starvation is by far the biggest cause of engine stoppage in Comanches. And then even more than that is just us pilots doing things that we would be that we shouldn't do. So I just wanted to make a quick note to everybody. Hey, this kind of thing is incredibly uncommon, but the situation that you end up in and the response to an emergency, that is common. So there was just this enormous response to your comments about glide ratios. And from Rob Whiteley, who's been around and teaching for a long time, he just said it was brilliant that you didn't try to stretch it to the airport. Sorry, I'm going back a little bit further, but I wanted to concur that quite a few people have reiterated that they felt like they would have tried to get to that airport and done something terrible, and your realization you couldn't make it and your switch to a plan B got a ton of respect. Yep, so that's the well done from Rob, CFI, IIMEI, ATP. Just a comment from somebody who happens to know that I was going to have to ferry an airplane, and I hired a CFII George Merriam in a similar type of airplane and went through every single emergency procedure there was. And it was a great reminder experience. So just to reiterate what you said, Will, of what they were saying is remind people, go and get with an instructor and go through the emergency procedures for your particular type of airplane. It really helps, makes you feel more confident. Many, many compliments. And then One question, do we practice engine out scenarios a lot? And so that's just a general question from Dutchman.
All my students practice engine out failures. And it's fun, especially in flight reviews, because you'll catch them, you'll catch them when they don't come anywhere near the airport. You always give it to them in the downwind, and you'll say, we need a power off 180, and they don't come anywhere near landing the airplane. Chances are they're going to throw the gear out, like Will said. They're going to throw the gear out, throw the flaps out, and that's going to shorten you, and you're not going to make the airport. But there's nothing better in a flight review just to make sure you know where you're at.
George, excuse me, did I make the airport that last time there?
Getting hell.
No inside jokes here. Yeah.
That's why I wrote flight review.
Yeah. But part of what's great about all of us here is, when's the last time you practiced it? Sorry, go ahead.
I did 2 yesterday in my VFR. And both times I said to the guy that was with me, this feels just like a glider.
Yeah.
Well, you know, when I first started learning to fly, I learned it from Larry LaFleur in Northampton. He the way we did it was kill the engine across from where you're going to land, and then glide to a landing. And that was in a tripacer, of course. That's the way we landed. Of course, we had 800-foot traffic patterns, and it was a glide to a landing every time. Probably.
So when let's see here. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. Yep, you're loud and clear.
So when I just got my Comanche, I'm still training, and we would always do engine out scenarios in the Cessna. And when we first took off with the Comanche, almost right away, my instructor is like, "Oh, you lost your engine." That overwhelmed me to the point where I asked him, "Can we not do that for a while? Because I want to learn how to fly this thing first, and not deal with, the whole engine out thing." So now I feel like I got a good grip on the plane. I understand it. I'm the one flying it the most. What do you do when you do an engine out drill? Because when we pull the throttle back with the gear down, everything goes nuts. The plane does not like that. Do you just ignore that, or do you got a trick? What do you do?
Usually it's best glide speed. Pick a place to land. If you happen to be next to the airport because you're just doing practice, you know where you're going to land. There's 3 tools to land the airplane. The first and most important is the power, but you just lost the power. What are the other 2 tools to land the airplane? It's ground track is the most important tool. So you adjust your ground track to match your rate of descent, to make that field. And if you turn out high, which you will, because when the engine really, really dies on you, you want to get to that field, you'll end up getting there high. So that's why you use the flaps and the slip, and or both.
So it's a good idea to just get up there and practice your slips.
If you're dirty because your wheels are out and your flaps, no one ever says you can't retract the flaps. But like Will said, he had some thoughts about the gear, so he's going to leave the gear down. So adjust that ground track. There's nothing else that's going to save you. You have to adjust the ground track. If you look like you're not going to make the field, go straight for it. Don't look for a final approach. Come in on that field crooked, just so that you can make the field.
Okay.
The field. It doesn't have to be an airport, just the field.
And then when you practice, you are supposed to pull all power out and just ignore the alarms.
Well, if your gear's up. If your gear's up, you're gonna get some alarm, right?
So,
Yeah,
but
I know what you mean now by the plane doesn't like it. So yes, when you pull all that out and you still have your gear up, you will get the
Yeah,
gear
you're gonna-
down alarm. Yep, and you can go ahead and fly with that blaring and annoying you all day.
okay, just
Yep.
that's what I
And
was
to
curious
answer,
about.
yep, exactly. Yeah, it's designed to try to prevent you from landing with your gear up. And so when you pull your power back to a certain point, it's going to start yelling at you. And
Oh, yeah.
in this case, you're doing it on purpose and you can just ignore it. To your second question though, should you go up and practice slipping? What Will said is he slipped incredibly aggressively, learn to slip your Comanche aggressively, do it at altitude. So yes, that is a great question. And the answer is
So,
yes.
Get up there, give it full rudder, and see what happens.
And full opposite aileron and see what happens. Yep, just go up really high so that you got plenty of time if you surprise yourself.
And push the nose
Oh,
down. Push the nose down. Make sure you push the nose down.
Yep, watch your
That's
airspeed.
Interesting, Mike. I was going to ask the same thing because it depends on the phase of flight, correct? Because everybody says, pitch for best glide. Well, if you're like Will and you're at cruise, Will, I bet you didn't pitch down. You probably had to trim up, and versus on a departure engine failure, you got to push down hard. Correct? I've never been in the position, but that's what's in my mind.
Well, if you're trimmed for a climb, it's just the nose is just gonna drop down and try to maintain the airspeed you're trimmed for.
If you're trimmed for it, yeah, okay.
So
that's a good question.
Say one more thing and then I'll be quiet. That slip, when you've got your flaps down and gear down and your power's back and you've got as much drag on the airplane and you're not gonna make it, you don't have any choice. So slips can be really, really magic, especially not only, for emergencies, but if you have some terrain you're trying to avoid and you have to stay really high and really slow and it's not working out, slip it, but of course it's still not working out, clean it up and go, and try it again. So yeah, slips are a wonderful tool for getting your airplane down when you don't have any more tools left. Anyway, thank you.
Actually,
Yeah, good
slip is
good
kind
input.
of handy if you're looking for a place to land, because if you're at altitude and you put a slip in, you can look down underneath that wing.
That's right.
Good point, Pete.
Also, if you're gonna slip with your passengers in there, make sure you tell them, because it's dramatic if you don't know what it is and you're in one of the other seats.
Yeah, it does make you feel like somebody grabbed your stomach and pulled it sideways, doesn't it? Yep, warn your passengers.
When I said my comment, I said that's what I was thinking.
They might not get on in there with you on the return trip after you land.
Yeah.
A lot of times when I'm flying with like young eagles or family friends, something like that, I'll use that size lip so they can see underneath that wing.
I'm going to return to the chat window unless there's anybody else that wants to jump in real quick on slips.
Got a quick question actually for the CFIs. In my 172, used to be able to roll the trim all the way back, power out, roll the trim all the way back, and it got you this mushy glide that was close to best glide. Does the Comanche do the same thing? I've never experimented with it, where you just roll the trim all the way back and it'll get you at that 100-ish miles an hour.
That's what
you have to trim back, but you're not going to be all the way back.
No, if you go all the way back, you'll stall.
Okay.
Yep. And Malcolm, whose voice you just heard, is one of our many very experienced CFIs, and he's correct. But your question about can you trim for a very mushy glide that's going to be pretty close to best glide is yes. It's a good tool.
Yeah, just in my Cessna, you could spin the wheel all the way back, and that's what it gave you. Was almost best glide. Okay.
Yep. So
But
Jim
just remember,
Walcott, oh, go ahead.
if you do that, remember that that trim setting is going to vary with the load, the power. Well, you won't have any power, but and the CG of the airplane. So, it's a good start, but you might have to untrim a bit to get there, depending on your configuration as far as the aircraft itself.
When
And
we were
that's an
putting together
excellent
that-
point.
when we were
Greg
putting together
Squires
that,
is, hey, just give me 1 second, Pete. Greg Squires is ComancheZOOM. He's a DPE on best glide, made the point that when your airplane's lighter, your best glide is slower. And so there is a published table of best glides for the Comanche models, and then you adjust down if you have less weight in the airplane, either less fuel or less passengers and baggage. Go ahead, Pete.
when we put together that the safety spotlight thing on emergency procedures, Malcolm has pointed out to me that if you're going to pitch for best glide, you pitch and trim, take the weight off your hands, and then you don't have to hold on to the yoke. You're available for other things.
Mm-hmm. So Jim Walcott asked Will, what did you have your glide ratio set at? And was it accurate with your actual forced landing glide for your 4-flight ring?
So I think I saw that and I had to look it up. I said it's a 9-to-1. I know that's really conservative. But I know a lot of the comments were, great job on not stretching it. And I just didn't even want to be tempted to do that. And it's hard to say if I didn't actually measure the total flight distance because I was circling because I didn't have to reach for my destination. It was right below me. So it was just kind of like making circles to really keep sight of the airport. So I can't tell you if it was accurate in the sense that it eliminated the bad options or the unfeasible ones very quickly. But there were still 3 very viable options below me. And I think if I remember correctly, the airport I ended up landing at was maybe half of the distance from, where the little plane is to the edge of the glide ring. So it wasn't like I was trying to push anything. I'm sure people set their glides to difference based on, their experiences and their comfort level. I've never tested it out, and maybe I will afterwards to see what the can do. How far I can really stretch it.
Yeah.
But
when you're working on your commercial ticket, there's a maneuver that we practice. It's called a 1080 steep spiral dive. What you're supposed to do is pick a target just like you were doing a circle or turn around a point and spiral down from 5,000 feet right over a field. And it's supposed to be an emergency procedure with the intention of using that point as a point to land. Commercial maneuver.
Do I get credit for that already?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. You did good.
Check. Now all you need to do is Lacey eats Jandels and take the check, right?
And Nate's on pylons.
Oh yeah. Don't give everybody nightmares, George. So yes, and then Mike Ellis added something that's helpful. So Larry mentioned that the glide ratio changes dramatically if the prop stops versus whether it's windmilling, which is exactly right. And it's one of the reasons that the twins and the singles are different. In the twins, you can actually stop the prop, and in the singles, that's normally not true. But you do glide better with your prop stopped. And Mike Ellis pointed out that with the gear up and the prop forward, glide ratio is 10-to-1. With the prop back in your lap in course, it's 13-to-1. And then when you drop your gear, and now you're really dirty and your flaps are down as well, and your props forward in the landing configuration, it's 7-to-1. So the Comanches have this dramatic glide slope ratio range, depending on whether you're completely dirty with your gear down and your prop all the way forward, or whether you're completely clean with your gear up, flaps up, and prop in your lap, or I don't even know, maybe we're 14-to-1 with our prop stopped. We hopefully never test that.
And of course, Will had his 4-flight glide ratio set to something very conservative, as he says, of 9-to-1. And that's sounds like a good idea because it would keep you from trying to stretch, unless, in fact, if it had been set to 13-to-1, it would have shown Lumberton Airport as being within his glide range, in which case he might have been able to go to Lumberton and successfully land there. So in fact, if you know that you're going to keep the gear up, keep the flaps retracted, and pull the prop back in the case of an engine failure, then your best bet is probably to adjust it to as the exact or as close to correct glide range as you can, because it would be a shame to not try for an airport that is in fact reachable.
Good
Your
point.
angle of attack's going to change just a little bit if that prop stops in front of you. On my engine failure, I had four blades, and the prop stopped in front of me, and you can't feather it once it stops. It's stuck in position, so it's going to act as a huge addition to the drag. So your angle of attack, in order to get your best glide, is going. The airspeed might be the same, but you're pushing a prop, and so in order to keep that speed, you got to change your angle of attack.
You know what, George? It's good that you said that, because George just corrected something that I said that made a misimpression, which is it depends on the angle your prop was at when it stops, whether it's going to be an improvement or not. So George, thank you. And Malcolm, you're right on.
Right on.
Richard asked, could you have moved to the right seat for better visibility?
I could have. I mean, I honestly didn't realize the issue because I was very focused. When I was flying the plane at this point, I was really looking out the side windows because I was trying to keep the field in sight. So, I mean, I was circling, using the side windows to see it, I wasn't trying to put the nose down too aggressively. And I didn't notice the oil issue until I was in the flare. Another issue that I would have run into if I tried to do that was I'm not a CFI. I haven't, normally flown from the right side of the plane, and I don't have toe brakes on the right side of the plane either.
I gotta say, I think that moving to the other side would have been a very poor choice indeed.
Yeah, exactly.
Unbuckling your seatbelt, shifting over, buckling your seatbelt, which, as we know, takes two hands, and now suddenly you've got the wrong hand on the control. To control the power. Well, not that you were trying to control power, but everything would be somewhere other than where you're used to it. I think that would be highly discouraged to try and make a seat change.
What you got to do too is use Jason Miller. He's a nationally known flight instructor. He says use the Lindbergh reference.
Yeah, when I had one of my unscheduled events, as I turned from my base to final, that changed my picture because I was looking out the right side of the windscreen because I had a little hole about yay big that I could see. As I changed my picture and I came around lining up with the runway, I moved my head up, and like what happened to Will, it was like there was nothing there. I was back in IMC, and I actually knee jerked and pushed the wheel forward a little bit, just bang. And then I had to tell myself, what are you doing, Rob? Find some other way, because it's that get down thing. And when you introduce any other variable like that, you go right back into that lizard brain thing. So my advice would be just look at what you have, look at your resources, and if you're comfortable with it, don't change anything, because one of the things you're fighting is not only the fact you don't have an engine anymore, you're fighting all that stuff churning around in the back of your brain, all that lizard brain that may make you do something really weird, because I physically pushed the nose down on my airplane a little bit violently and then had to reset and go, no, just fly this thing. This isn't, you're in a normal base to final turn. You just real quiet. So yeah, one thing I like about this discussion, I like a lot of them, but the psychology of this stuff is a variable. I think that we talk about glide ratios and we talk about this and that, and put the flaps down, put the flaps up. Sometimes we don't look at the main guidance system in the airplane, and which is us and our vulnerabilities. It's just part of being humans. But I'm really impressed with Will, because I think that one of the things that he brought up was those psychological factors. And I think all the experienced pilots here have probably felt that little bit where you go, hey, I'm becoming a passenger in my own airplane, and let's snap out of it. But anyway, I just think that that Will did an excellent job, and I think he did a really excellent job of analysis, particularly with being new to this whole flying game, and congratulations, Will. I think it was really well done.
We need to push him towards flight instructor.
Yeah.
Hurry up, Will.
I agree.
This is terrific clarity.
It really
Great.
is a good thing.
A lawyer, flight instructor. Great combination.
I do want to point out though, because you all are the survivors. And an engine out is normally survivable. I mean, the engine outs on departure, not so much. That's like a 50-50. But at the same time, everybody who has spoken here has said there was a little voice in your head that you listened to that said, fly the airplane. And you all said, my training took over.
Can
I
I say
just want to
something?
point out the commonality. Yes, please.
Okay, 1978, I was ferrying an airplane. Night, winter. As I'm up about 8,500, 9,500 feet going through, air traffic control says make an immediate right turn. I made an immediate right turn. Never thought about it. Next thing I know, I was in a flat spin. Had no idea, because I'd never trained in that on instruments. Gyros are going nuts. Compass is going nuts, but my wings are perfectly level. And I'm trying to figure this out in my brain. I'm talking to air traffic control. I didn't quit. Told them what my problem was. I didn't know I was in a flat spin. Anyway, another pilot come on board, but air traffic can come back, and he said, "What way are you turning now?" Thinking I was in a full spin, but my wings were friggin' level. I said, "I don't know." Everything was going around so fast. I mean, I was really spinning. He said, "Do you know which way?" I said, "No." He said, "Okay, I want you to make a left turn now with your ailerons." He said, "I'll tell you when to stop." I immediately turned into the left turn. He said, "Stop." And I rolled it level. What I presume was level, right? It kicked me out of the spin at 1,500 feet above the ground. 1,500 feet. My passenger was smoking a cigarette. There was nothing left of the cigarette, and she actually burned. I still got the marks of my hand on the throttles because she dug in so bad with her fingernails. She went right through me. Anyway, we found out the stupidest thing on the Pipers, the center of gravity on their tanks, if it's just at a certain perfect situation on that tank, the center of the gravity changes when you make a quick turn of something, and it flip you into it. It took us a long time, plus talking to the people at Piper, what caused this? Just the right amount of fuel I had in my tanks. And when I made that evasive turn, that kicked me into it. But when I switched the other way, when that air traffic controller, I didn't know what the hell to do now. I was flying the airplane, of course, but I didn't know what was happening. And he did that and saved my life. 1,500 feet when I come out. Middle of a goddamn middle of a snowstorm too. It was snowing. I was in the cloud.
Man, your flight, your controller, the controllers, it is so rare that they're pilots.
I know he wasn't, but there was nothing left. Nobody knew what to do. Even other pilots could hear them. One pilot, and I still remember them, all he said was, and I knew what he was saying. You're dead, mate.
Yeah.
But
and you're here with us now.
And I flew the airplane, and my and the passenger on the right side. I know kid. And then so I turned around, come back, landed, got out and shook like a leaf, and then one of the air traffic controllers come up in a pickup truck because they wanted to meet me. And I thanked them. He said, my whole career, I've never had nothing. And and when they watch Top Gun, if you ever seen Top Gun and the thing,
Oh yeah.
the only, because I was in the Air Force, right? And the only thing they ever spun was a T-33. They never spun anything else.
So, what exactly did the air traffic controller do or say? I'm just really curious.
Okay, well, what the air traffic control, because I'm spinning, I'm flat, but I'm spinning on a flat spin. We didn't know it at the time, but we figured it out after with the wings.
What
The air
did-
traffic, I'm talking to the air traffic controller because I'm asking them, like, basically I was asking them for help.
Okay.
Because I'm in instruments, but I didn't know what the hell was happening. Because I'd never been in that situation before. Never. And no, most pilots never are, I'm sure. And he just said to me, what direction are you turning? But the DG was spinning so damn fast, and so was the compass. So,
I see.
right? The ball was in the center. It was moving out on this, but at that time I wasn't concentrating on it, right? I just realized my wings were level. And he said, what direction are you going? I said, I really don't know. He said, I want you to make a left. And I did. I spun my ailerons, turned left, kicked it over left. And he said, I'll tell you when to stop. Because I was still going around. I did that. He said, stop. And I flipped it again, and it flipped me out of it. Why? We have no idea. Just one of those quirky things in life.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
How-
No. Yeah. Unbelievable.
How did you have the altitude to get out of that?
I come out at 1500.
What did you go into?
I was in it between 85 and 95.
So you went.
Wow.
So you were spinning for 7,000 foot.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
We're
well, that
so
wasn't weird. I was
happy you're
using-
here.
Yo,
Yeah.
I was just, you should have seen my passenger. And I'm dripping blood. The blood is dripping off my fingers because she absolutely froze and and dug her hands in. It wasn't her fault. She was just scared to death, right?
Sure.
I heard
And you
this
were in
story
you were in a
about Doug
Piper,
Logan
but
related.
I was
which
in a Piper, yeah.
Yeah, but
I
which
was in
Piper?
Warrior,
Yeah.
That was in a PA-28?
a PA-28, 161.
Those are famous for distinctly not doing that.
Well, they're except everything happened at the very moment the tanks weren't full, right? And when I made that immediate turn, because that's what they call, because there was something coming towards me, right? I couldn't see. And he said, make an immediate right. It was at night. And I just turned it. I just grabbed my ailerons and made an immediate flip. And that's exactly when I went into it.
And
they
I'm
think
sure
that-
that's the weight transfer, was it?
That's right. That's where the weight transfer between the tanks, and it flipped me into it. Yeah.
So would you say then that kind of says in future, if you do get an urgent response from ATC, not to like throw it in, but just still do it gently and
Well,
correct it?
No, if they say make an immediate right turn, they probably
was-
have a good reason.
Yeah, they had a good reason. He said that. Yeah, they told me.
Yeah.
That
I wasn't
it was
blaming him or you. I was
no,
just...
no, it was definitely a conflict, right?
Yeah.
One thing.
Right.
And I've lost a couple of engines in my career, and dead sticked it in. I mean, lucky once over a city, and that was a hairy little thing, but I made it.
Amazing story. We are so glad you're still here with us. I am
am
going to go
too.
back to the
Thank you.
chat window. Yeah.
Okay.
No, thanks for
Bye,
sending that
you
in.
guys. Good
And
night.
yeah, good night. Sue Folkringa is another very experienced Comanche instructor and said,
It's funny.
we've got a stuck mic out there, by the way.
Look at me. Brand new.
Pete, do you want to mute everybody real quick?
Well, see,
Good job.
Okay, everybody's muted.
Thank you. And I'm just running back. So Sue Folkringa, another Comanche instructor, said, practice going full course to full flying and back sometime with your prop. It's a big difference. And I agree. It will help you really get into your physical feelings, how much of a difference your prop pull forward and prop pull back is. Just don't do it really fast. The prop doesn't like it. And unfortunately, when I had to go out to unmute, I lost my place. So give me 15 seconds.
Denied.
Okay. Larry just mentioned, what about prop and cruiser crime? That makes a difference also. So great conversation. So he's pointing that out. Just a quick reminder to everybody that the seatbelt and shoulder harness group buy are in the process of being negotiated. So you can either go to the Northeast Tribe, and Pete will put up a link to how to get in there to register your interest in getting a shoulder harness in the group buy special, or you can go onto the Piper Comanche Facebook group and put a post in there. Lots of comments though on climb and cruise. And then a bunch of questions on, Andrew asked a really good question. Where does the prop go with loss of oil pressure in a case like this? And in a case like this, Will's prop stayed exactly where it was when it got stuck because there was no oil pressure. But normally there's a spring. And many people chimed in and added this information, which many of the rest of us didn't know. The prop spring will drive the prop pitch to high RPM in a single, which is the same as putting it full forward. And thank you to everybody that put that in there. And that's true for constant speed props. The multi-engine featherable props, it goes the other way. Just a quick note that for those of us who have closed the door with the seatbelt in the way and had the door open in mid-flight, that's good experience for an in-flight emergency. True, Kelly, good point.
If I may chime in, my my door latch is in not optimum condition, so my door does pop open in flight from time to time, especially when we're maneuvering, and yeah, it's quite annoying. So we're having a new how do you call it, door catch made, and that should keep that from happening. But it's not the end of the world when it does it, because the airflow keeps it shut. It just gets really cold really fast
and a bit noisy.
Yeah, so but yeah, it's not the end of the world when it happens.
Good info for everybody here. Yeah, don't let your door popping open, which is not an emergency, don't let that turn your flight into an emergency.
I had a similar incident with a door. I was flying a PA-28 Arrow. It was a commute home, so it was actually a time-limited flight where I ended up having to turn around and return to the departure airfield. But I did very nearly make the mistake of turning that into an emergency by actually, a door catch came open, and in some infinite wisdom, I decided to try and open it to close it again. And it was only after I went through the motor skills of doing that that I realized that that was not going to be possible, but I had now fully opened the door on the plane, which made it a lot worse.
Yeah.
So then that became much more of an emergency, but it's important to kind of restrict that immediate action, which is to, try and close it. When I spent a lot of time trying to close it. It took me about 10 minutes before I told myself, hey, you've got to fly the plane,
And the common thing that I just want to reiterate, the thing that we've heard from all these people who had things and then are still here to tell us they had things, is that they flew the airplane.
Jay, can I chime
go ahead.
So on the back to the propeller thing, in a multi-engine airplane, I just want people that might get a little confused about this. When you turn the engine off using the mixture control in a piston-powered multi-engine airplane, the propeller won't go into feather, because as it slows down, unless the propeller control is in the feather position, there's some people call them start locks. I don't know what. There's all different names for them, but it keeps your as your propeller finds off to find pitch as it slows down. It'll stop your propeller from going all the way to feather. So I just wanted to make sure people understood that like we reiterated, a constant speed prop on a single engine will just go back to fine pitch on loss of oil pressure, and even though a multi-engine airplane is featherable, it won't automatically do it. It'll just go to a fine pitch and stop. So that's when you have to physically, if the propeller is still spinning, drop the control all the way back to feather. So if anybody, hopefully there's some multi-engine pilots out there that can help me say that right, but I don't want to misunderstand. I think a PT6 engine, you can feather it on the ground, but you can start them, but not piston powered. George, is that
That's
right?
a good clarification. Go ahead, George.
I guess George doesn't want to comment.
Oh, what was that?
Oh, never mind.
TJ,
I just
are there
was
more?
talking about the differences when you stop the engine in a multi-engine airplane as the propeller speed decreases, it won't go all the way back.
Yeah, it depends on what you do.
Stop on the start locks.
It depends on what you do with the prop lever.
Right, exactly. So, cool.
Yep. Yep. So good clarification, because I was pencil whipping it, as it were. That the singles do one thing automatically because of the prop spring, but with the multis, it's another, and then you have to use your prop lever to get it into feather.
We lost oil pressure in a Cherokee. No, it was an Arrow. And the way we noticed that we didn't look at the oil pressure gauge, which was indicating that we were losing oil. What it was when the gear came up, it opened an improperly fastened quick drain.
Ooh.
And so then we put the gear down to stay in the pattern for doing touch and goes. And when we came off the ground the second time, we had spread a line of oil from the downwind, the base leg, final approach, and then we were taking off. And we got an oscillation in the engine because we had no oil in the governor. And yep, it starts going, it starts looking for itself, and it's unable to. So the engine was pretty much doomed at that time. So we just came back in, made the final landing.
So good clarification on what's going to happen with the singles and twins. George, you've brought something up that probably belongs in the top 10 tips for new Comanche owners that I only learned at last annual. Comanches didn't come with quick drains. Many people install them because it makes changing the oil so much easier. Many people have a tendency to leave a bit of tubing attached to the quick drain thinking because it's so easy. Do not do that, because that tubing can get caught on things and partially open your quick drain and start draining oil out of your engine. And yeah, exactly.
Here's another. Yeah, go ahead.
Just any questions on that? Because I sort of went through it quickly.
The one thing I was going to talk about oil is, where do you put the oil in a Comanche? Right in the top, right in front of the pilot. If you forget the cap, you're going to have problems on takeoff.
It depends. It depends on the Comanche, actually, George.
Oh, okay.
They're different because you're mostly in a C.
Yeah,
but in a C, you're right.
In the C model, right?
Yeah.
In that,
and in many of them, they have, as Will pointed out, many of them have that pop-up oil filler door, even if the oil filler is not underneath it, because in many cases Piper used a cowling set for a generic thing, and then they might have the oil filler cap in a different place.
Yeah, it's happened to me in the parachute plane. It got and on takeoff, we've got oil on the windshield. So there's two things: you're heavy, and you got to come right back and land, and now you got oil on the windshield, and you can't see up front.
Right.
FCG. All the parachutes.
I'm going to just try to whip through these comments in the chat window. Ryan Jeffrey, who had to take off and said to Will, thank you, said, if you go into fields with the rows, along with the rows, it will be much smoother, and bean fields are probably your smoothest choice. Any comments from those who do a lot of off-airport landings?
Yeah, that was a great choice, Will.
It was my only choice.
A comment, right? A comment from Richard Langley that I've heard from many very experienced glider instructors if you have your glider rating, the off airport landings, he said would have been a non-event. I don't know, but I've heard from many people who are both glider instructors and power instructors that they really encourage their power students to get their glider ratings. Dutchman comments that the engine out simulation trips the gear up alarm, which goes back to the question earlier about my airplane doesn't like it when I pull the power back. And yes, when you go to sim engine out, everything gets noisy. This is a situation where you can ignore your alarms.
I would just say, CJ, I think that's a great thing to train with, because that alarm is incredibly annoying. And if you want to talk about like increasing the stress level in an emergency, like that will do it. Like among other things, because I mean, if your CFI simulates the engine out by pulling your power back, and all of a sudden you have this alarm, you have an emergency going on. I mean, you won't have to deal with that alarm in when you have a real emergency, but it just is another factor that can you can use it to your advantage to enhance your training, as long as you don't get accustomed to flying with it on, obviously, because you don't want to land with it on.
Yeah. And Dutchman asked, what is best glide speed? And Pete, can we take a commitment for the next ComancheZOOM, which is when will be talking about recovery, like how do you get these airplanes out of fields and off highways when we put them there without damaging them more, hopefully. There is a table that I will send you that we need to put onto the slides for the pre-Zoom.
Sure.
And that will be the table of best glides at max gross for all of the different Comanche models. So that will be there for next time. And it is compliments of a now deceased, very famous Comanche driver who made the current POHs, Doug Killow. And he put a lot into trying to make sure we had better, more complete POHs, and then there should be a new revision at some point. Rob, you had mentioned it's odd when you're looking at your plane and all your references are different. Lots and lots of comments on best guides, more comments on ForeFlight and best glide and glide rings. This question, I think you already answered about whether the insurance is paying for the engine repair since the plane was virtually undamaged. And Will said, stay tuned because that's coming up. So his part 3 will be dealing with the insurance company. Let's see, suggestions to call. A couple of people saying call Kristen Winter, they'll travel, or Cliff at Heritage Aero, but a couple of people like Kristen's amazing. And this is in respect to your being able to get somebody who's really experienced with Comanches to come and go over the plane with your shop. Bill Brooks commented, the older I get, the faster I try to get to 7,500 to 8,500 cruise altitude on all my cross-country flights. Altitude is your friend. Lots and lots of just fantastic presentations, spellbinding. You mentioned damage after landing. What happened? Will, do you want to save that for recovery? Or is it something you want to touch on here?
Well, I'll just kind of briefly touch on it. So the damage that I caused the plane was, I mean, they did a extensive inspection of it afterwards, and the short and sweet of it is that there wasn't any substantial damage found to the airframe, the gear, everything held pretty well. The only thing that came off were, I think, 2 or 3 antennas that were on the belly of the plane, and the repair for that was estimated at like $200. But the problem was that the recovery team didn't own the plane, and they didn't love it the same way I did. And there's a whole series of things that they did that I mean, obviously the rebuild is still happening. I mean, I wasn't kidding when Lycoming, like, they control the process because their schedule is they build it when you put the order in. So it takes, I think, about 90 days. So with that in mind, I mean, we're still kind of going through the repairs and identifying stuff that's, we're coming across the plane. But the stuff that happened afterwards is just the stuff that I didn't do. And it's not stuff the A&P did. It's stuff that the recovery team did. But I'll touch upon that more in the one next week.
Mm-hmm. A great tease. Many, many people, I mean, just fantastic, great work, good job, outstanding, great learning experience, etc. Just, I don't know if you had a chance to skim the chat window, but an awful lot of people saying, thank you for sharing this experience with us, and great job getting that plane down and thinking through the whole emergencies that was happening. Colton Gibbs, who some of you met at the ComancheTown at the holiday fly-in, mentioned that his father passed that plane sitting in the field driving down the road and called me and asked if I knew who it was. And Colton and his dad both fly Comanche. So you're here's an eyewitness.
There was a pretty substantial traffic jam that I caused from all the rubbernecking that happened on the highway.
Hey, Will, are you aware of AOPA's podcast called There I Was?
Yeah, I am. I listened to a couple of them. Like they have like the Never Again, which is like the poor decision making that, you know, you never do that again. And then yeah, I have been familiar with that. Yeah, maybe I should reach out to them and see if they'd be interested in something like that.
Oh, they'd love to hear it. And it sounds like you know, that's where I heard the one where the guy got carbon monoxide and woke up in a field. There I was. It's a great podcast. It's just
and actually, I will just mention that for the two pilots that survived carbon monoxide accidents, both of the survived accidents were in laminar flow light singles. One was I think it was a Comanche 400 and the other was a Mooney. Something, you know, who knows if it's pure fate or what, but maybe our Comanches and Moonies are just that much more awesome. Scott Morris commented in his one emergency with his family on board when the engine stopped. The one thing that my wife will never forget is ATC asking, how many souls are on board? Fortunately, his ended well.
Yeah, I had forgotten about that, CJ, until I think I saw that comment and I was like, yeah, that is kind of an unsettling question. And one thing I didn't mention in the presentation is, you know, you never know how you're going to react in a situation. And I found myself trying to pull information from ATC. I was trying to use them as a resource and leveraging their ability to do things that I didn't have to do, like giving me the runway headings for these different airports to help me identify where they were, the runway lengths, stuff like that. And at one point, I remember, I told you this last night, I was talking to them and they weren't responding. And I was very frustrated. And then I realized I was like yelling in the mic, but I wasn't keying the mic because of the adrenaline and like trying to do too many things at once that I just forgot to key the mic. And I mean, it was probably like 3 seconds of frustration, but I was like, oh, you got to press the mic down in order to talk.
And that 3 seconds is 3 years. Yeah. Yep. Ryan Jeffrey mentioned, and my flight instructor reiterated this, gravel roads can make an excellent choice. They're usually run mile longs. And I'll add something my flight instructor said, farm roads. If you look down and you happen to be in farm country, those usually light tan if it's not raining, tractor tracks actually are hard, firm, and usually go for a while. And I didn't even see them until he pointed them out. Jim Walcott. Oh, go ahead.
That's a good idea because the gravel roads that vehicles travel on usually have power lines along them, but the ones out in the middle of nowhere, you know, that go between the fields, they're generally not power lines. So yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, no, I totally missed it. I had been flying for 20 years and he was like, what about that farm road? And I was like, oh, duh. Yeah. Jim Walcott from the Air Force pitched in. He used to teach forced landings when he flew Navy T-34Cs, and we would pull the engine and let the student take the airplane down to 500 feet AGL as they attempted to set up for a field. What was the interaction with NTSB from Milton? Good question.
No, that is a good question, and that's because I'm not going to cover that in the other ones. So I got a call from the FAA, and they basically pass you along, and as long as, I mean, pretty much what they told me is it was a non-fatal accident. There was really no damage. like open and close the investigation immediately. The only thing that they ask for me is that I give them like I'm exaggerating, but like my, where I was born, my social security. I had to give them everything, like the logbooks for the last 2 years, the annuals. And I don't think I don't know if they're out for blood or, trying to get anybody in trouble, or I think they're just making sure you're like they wanted, the logbook for my BFR, they wanted a medical, or my most recent medical. They just wanted to make sure I was complying with all, the requirements to be a licensed pilot. I wanted to make sure the plane was airworthy. She actually had to send them. I could dig it up, but it was probably close to like 12 documents, just different things, and like the pictures of the logbook. So I had actually scanned all the logbooks because I didn't want to lose them, and it worked out pretty well when I had to give them to the shop in Wilmington. I've never shipped a package that I've insured for so much money than when I shipped those logbooks. But they ask you for the last 2 years, the last two of maintenance, the last 2 annuals. I don't think they asked for like an AD compliance sheet or anything like that. That's for an airworthiness. Did they ask for the airworthiness certificate? I don't know if they asked for that, but it was pretty straightforward. Like they had a list of items and they said, you need to send us all this stuff. And they were very, they weren't, for lack of a better word, they weren't pricks about it. They said, I was like, yeah, I have this stuff. I was in, of course, they're communicating with me over email and phone, and I'm up in, the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, and I'm telling them like, hey, I'll get that to you guys in like 4 days when I get home. And they're like, yeah, no problem, don't worry about it. And then of course I had to like get all the documents together, go to the hangar, make sure I had everything. I scanned, the documents I didn't have on a digital copy of, I scanned it, I sent it to them. But all they asked for after I sent them everything was just to let them know if there's any resolution on the cause of the failure. Mm-hmm. Which we can, like I said, we were speculating based on, what we can use to find out with a borescope, but we kind of have to defer that to Lycoming to see. But an interesting thing that came up was the adjuster had made a comment to me, which kind of caught my attention, but he told me to not be surprised if the FAA takes an interest in my incident, because he said he recovered another aircraft. I don't know if it was a Comanche or another aircraft with a Lycoming 4 or 6 cylinder, but he said it was a similar, I think it was even a 540, but he said it had a very similar failure mode and he had recovered it a few weeks prior. I never heard anything after that. They never followed up with me they just asked me to keep them informed about what was the cause of the failure. So the work with the FAA, and I think one of them was an NTSB investigator. I think there were 2 people. It was really a non-issue. The advice I would have is just make sure you have your ducks in a row and you're not, riding dirty with, of a plane that's not airworthy, or it's past annual and stuff like that. Because I think that would have got me in hot water. I'll stop there because I want to go into the insurance stuff. But it was not a big, it wasn't a big deal. It probably would have been more arduous of a process if somebody got hurt or the plane had been significantly damaged or there was serious personal property damage or somebody else got hurt. But that wasn't the case. So it was the case was open and shut pretty easy. And they even told me, they're like, yeah, they don't, someone told me they don't even send FAA investigators or NTSB investigators out unless somebody dies. So it's like, I don't know. They said they just don't have the resources and the manpower to do it. So they just, when they could take these low-hanging fruit off of their docket, so to speak, that they do. So it was pretty easy.
Good to know. Yeah. And one of the hard things in gathering Comanche accident statistics is unless there's severe damage or serious injuries or fatalities, they don't tend to end up in the NTSB database. So gear ups tend to be disappeared. They appear on the insurance dockets, but not the accident statistics, because there's never usually major damage. There are a bunch of questions that, for the sake of time, and in case anybody wants to go see Katie Coleman on the rover, I'm going to skip because you're covering them in the insurance section. But there's a good one here. Did you use your legal knowledge in the process, and do you have legal recommendations?
Was it the process with the insurance company or what?
It was a non-specific question. Greg, do you want to, Greg Meyer, if you're still here, do you want to answer that question? You had asked the question, did you use your legal knowledge in the process and do you have legal recommendations? Not sure if Greg is still with us.
I didn't, I mean, in the accident, no, not really. I mean, I relied on my training, my pilot training almost exclusively. Afterwards, when I was dealing with, I mean, flying is it's a privilege that gets extended to us, by the FAA and the government and everything like that. So when the government came and they were asking me for all these documents and stuff like that, I was like, here, I will cooperate fully. I wasn't gonna like get in like any kind of like legal argument. I didn't really have a reason to, because they weren't, putting up a wall or anything or being difficult to work with. Insurance company, yeah, I did use there was one time I had to flex a little bit, but we came to an agreement, but I haven't had too many issues, and I'll cover this in a few weeks, but I haven't had many issues with the insurance company at all. The whole process with the adjuster they've assigned it's been pretty, I mean, once I kind of like line everything up, it's really the A&P and the adjuster just working together. And I just kind of like sit back and say, you guys, I express I mean, they're both, the adjuster is supposed to be like an impartial arbiter between the insurance company and the insured. And then, I mean, the A&P has my best interest in mind. So the A&P is really any of the issues that the adjuster needs and the questions he has once everything is in place and the repairs are getting done. The adjuster just needs to contact the A&P, but he has to get like my verbal or my written authorization to do a lot of stuff. But the A&P is kind of like my representative, so to speak. But my legal knowledge and experience hasn't really come into play too much.
And I think we'll be getting into this more when you talk about dealing with your insurance company. So that is cool. I will just mention that David Asman, who in addition to teaching as an insurance agent, a Comanche driver who's recently become an agent, mentions that aviation insurance, and I'm just quoting this from the chat window, is usually much more fair with claims than our typical experience with auto insurance.
Yeah, that's why I called him, because I knew he was actually researching an insurance quote for me. So I called him and I was like, I guess, what do I like the insurance? Like, how do I do all this stuff? So that's why he was the first person I called, because I knew he would probably know the answer. And he did. So.
And he's an awesome guy. Jim Walcott mentioned his POH for the 260C advises against slips of long duration with the engine running because it could uncover fuel. Has anyone ever experienced this? And I think Jim is not here. George Merriam sometimes teaches in John Futter's 260C, and it is not just the 260Cs.
It includes the base 260 as well. It's an issue with mine as well. It's like 20 or 15 seconds or something. It's a considerable amount of time. I mean, I guess it's if you're trying to drop your aircraft from a pretty serious altitude in a quick period, as if you're on fire or something.
Right.
But it's not, I don't think a lot of people would have experience with it just based on the amount of time that it is. I think it's like 15 seconds. I'd have to look at my panel again, because I put there's a placard requirement for it.
Yep. Yeah. And you can eventually unport.
It's 30 seconds or more. Yeah. Okay. That's why.
Oh, wow.
I just zoomed into
That's helpful.
my panel. Yeah, it's a while.
That is an awesome way to get an answer right in the middle of a Comanche Zoom. And it's such a great question. Long slips of long duration. A bunch of us have that placard. Takes 30 seconds. So Serge Santilera mentioned slip versus speed brakes. If Mark Sullivan is still here, he's one of the few Comanches I know that has speed brakes. But is anybody else here have speed brakes? I mean, Mark's like, I can drop that airplane anywhere with my speed brakes, but they're an unusual mod in the Comanches. They're still available though, if anybody wants them. They're pricey. But Ron Kyle, who is one of the most experienced Comanche drivers. You think he's got 7,000 in his, and he's also one of the longest long haul drivers of Comanches that we know of, having done a 10.5-hour flight in a stock 250. Mentions you can actually approach a 1-to-1 glide ratio with gear down, full flaps, and a full, completely cross-controlled full forward slip. That's a 45-degree steep descent. So it really is an incredible tool. Let's see, Russ Greenlaw, if you're still here, we will have the table of Blessed Glide published next week. It actually was done in a comment by Doug Killow quite some time ago and never ended up in the book. Let's see. Oh, no, Malcolm corrected me that he says you'll find a detailed discussion of best glide versus weight, speed versus weight, and the kilo POH, so which is available from Webco. But the table of best glides is something different, and we will have that for next week. Tim asked, with the 4-flight shot, it looked like you were circling with the field off the right wing. Was that by intention or just how it worked out? He's asking because he was trained to keep the field on the pilot side.
That was not intentional. It's just the way it worked out. I was coming in, and because I had flown like when I initially had the engine failure, the field I was looking for was kind of just like to the back side of my left wing. And so I turned towards it, and then I was just trying to set it the way I set it up. I mean, there was no rhyme or reason. I picked a way and I went with it. So it's not really a very scientific or great answer. It's just kind of what I felt like doing.
Mm-hmm. Cool answer. Russ Greenlaw put a really interesting question into the chat window. And he says, at the half loaded condition I normally fly, my measured glide is about 900 feet per minute at 93 knots. Sea level, 1100 RPM, throttle closed, prop spinning. That makes an 11-to-1 glide. At altitude, maybe 11,000, it's more like 12-to-1. Sometimes they get under 900 feet per minute. How do you get 13-to-1? Now, the only thing that I know is from Zach Grant talking about the best speed mods, pointing out that it is really rare that we have new paint and that paint is quite a big source of drag. He also mentioned that misadjusted gear, where your gear doors don't quite close properly, will add drag. And there were a couple of other things in our airplanes that happen that'll add a little bit of drag. So Gross, if you're still here, those are the things that I can contribute. If other people have other things to contribute to the fact that Russ has done careful checking and is getting 12-to-1, not 13-to-1, now would be the time to jump in. And Russ mentions that better ratio may be at full weight, newer, heavier models. I'll stick with what I have measured over about 5 years, which is 12-to-1 high and 11-to-1 low. Which is fair. If you know your own best glide, by all, definitely that's the best thing you can do.
CJ?
Yes, Hank.
Many of those figures are back from before airplanes became antenna farms.
Good point. Really good point. Yep. You're right. The drag of the antennas. We forgot to mention that. So now we have a list of 3. Emily mentioned that Webco has the top latch STC for the doors. They just shipped one for the 180, but the 250s are out. Bob Wolstenholme, for those looking for top latches, is making things, and they're in Pennsylvania. Message me or put a note in the chat window if you need latches. People are commenting that top latch is really handy when the handle latch mechanism gets loose or if people don't close it properly. A comment that Sully, the guy that did the Miracle in a Hudson landing, was a glider guy in his spare time. So another vote for getting your glider rating, or at least flying gliders. And any mention of turning the fuel off? Is that something you did? Well, you and I talked about this last night.
So I didn't think about it until I was on my, like kind of right before my base to final, and I pulled the mixture back. And then in hindsight, I kind of thought about it. I mean, after this happens, and I'm sure everybody who's been through it does the same thing. You kind of Monday morning quarterback it. I mean, my outcome could not have gone any better. Or things couldn't have gone any better, but I'm still like trying to nitpick of what I did. I don't really think I needed to turn the fuel off, because at this point, the engine's dead. It's not, the engine driven fuel pump is not pumping any fuel into the engine. The electric fuel pump, I didn't have it on anymore because I had switched into a cruise climb setting. And I was like well outside the airport area. So I had shut it off. So there's really no risk of like pumping fuel into a dead engine. I could have, probably would have been the more prudent thing to do would have been to actually reach down to the floor and shut the fuel, put it in the off position. I didn't think about it. And I don't know. I can't explain why. It might've been that I didn't like the idea of like reaching down and taking my view, my eyes away from what was in front of me. There was obviously a lot of other stuff going on, but that probably would have been the right thing. But I don't even know if turning the fuel off, there's probably some A&P out there that could answer that question. If I would really derive any benefit or increase safety by doing that when there's no fuel being pumped out of the tanks. That was actually, I had strangely enough, you talked about accident statistics. I had the opposite problem. I was completely full. I had like 60 gallons of fuel on board. And one of the people that stopped by, the random onlookers was a pilot, and he was probably a Bonanza pilot because he was wearing scrubs. So I'll just make that assumption. He was like, "Oh, is you run out of fuel?" And I was like, "Yeah, I wish that was my problem, because then I wouldn't be looking at a new engine right now." But no, there was yes, that's kind of a long answer to it.
I think I like the thing you did that I think was commendable was, when you do your emergency checklist and, it calls to, if you have time, you're doing all this troubleshooting, fuel pumps on and select different tanks and all this stuff. If you're not intending to turn your master switch off because you want your radios or you want to run your flaps or whatever, it's really a good idea to go back and turn the fuel boost pump off, because if you do have a problem and a fuel line breaks, you'll have a bigger problem. So yeah, fuel pump, that was good, because and with the engine not turning, you don't have a mechanical fuel pump, so your threat there was pretty much eliminated. And by not having the electric pump, I don't think the position of the valves at that point in time would be a big factor, but getting the motive force off. If your prop is still turning, your engine's still turning, it's still pressurizing the lines from your pump to the carburetor or the pump to the fuel injection system, that would be pretty prudent to make sure the valves were shut, because it's going to starve that mechanical fuel pump and eliminate that source of fire, I guess. Some thoughts on that?
That's a good point.
I had my fuel bladders replaced at the end of the summer. And when we did, the AP is also a friend of ours, and they let me hang out around the airplane when we were doing the operation. So my fuel valves also move very heavy, and that's just age or whatever. So when we took the fuel valve apart, there was actually quite a bit of pressure behind it coming from the wing. So based on that, you don't necessarily need a fuel pump to get fuel pressure. So I'd say it's a good idea to turn the valves off to really shut off that fuel coming from the tanks.
Yeah. If you've got the presence of mind, or I will admit that I had one case where I actually was like, and I went back in and I just turned everything off that could be a spark. And then the NTSB was like, you changed everything. And I was like, yeah, I did. We have actually made it through the chat window. And this has been a long one, and I appreciate everybody staying in for the marathon session. There is one last bit. And if everybody wants to go to abcnews.go.com, Mission to Mars Live, Katie's on the panel for those that are curious about our very own Comanche drivers who are also astronauts. And that's in the chat window. But there was a very interesting comment on the NTSB, which came in from Mike Meadows. Emily said, my best friend's an NTSB accident investigator, and they're not even sending them out to fatalities during COVID. And Mike mentioned, my understanding is that the NTSB are only interested in finding out what caused the accident or incident. The FAA, on the other hand, are looking for enforcement issues against the pilot. And sadly, the NTSB often delegates to the FAA for investigations, which then means the FAA look at the pilot and plane records very carefully to find wrongdoing. Mike, I think Mike had to go, but if you're still here, because we have Comanche pilots who are on both sides of this issue, we actually have one who's an FAA enforcement guy who did a beautiful restoration on the Comanche. He and I had a big conversation about this. He's like, even on the enforcement side, we're trying not to, but if it's willful, we have to. And then on the FAST team program manager side, they mentioned that around 2016, the FAA did a huge about face and started to try to really focus on, it's called the New, Kinder, Gentler FAA, but they genuinely started to look at trying to avoid enforcement unless it's willful. If you do it on purpose and it's really obvious, yes, they'll throw the book at us, but that probably is as it should be. If it is not deliberate, then they're trying to collect our information so that we can learn from it. And I will say that the statistics, despite the increased number of flights from people who had not been flying for a long time in airplanes that were just getting re-exercised in 2020 because of COVID, the accident statistics rates went down, which suggests that the kinder, gentler approach of trying to make us better rather than throwing the book at us when we make mistakes may be working. Sorry to throw that in, but I thought it might be helpful. And Mike, if you're still here, your comment was really helpful, and feel free to push back or adjust.
No, I think you're right. They definitely are trying to be kinder, gentler, but there's a fundamental difference in what the NTSB and the FAA do. The FAA really are looking to see if there's something wrong, whereas if you call the NTSB after an accident, they're not interested in looking to find that somebody did something wrong unless it was the cause of the accident. So there's no punishment. They don't ask you for a 601 ride or 701 or whatever that's called.
Yeah.
Whereas
the competency. Yep. Absolutely.
I was gonna say there's an article that just came out in this past month's AOPA magazine. It's written by the gentleman who's like he runs like their legal services, and he talks about a shift to the kinder, gentler, what you're referring to is, and it's how their ATC is reporting a lot more stuff that pilots are doing, even if pilots don't know it's happening. And I think it's just to kind of develop the statistics and identify the trends to solve the problems. It's an interesting read, but it's in this past month's issue of AOPA magazine.
I will take a look at that because that's an issue of real interest. The fact that we seem to be getting better statistics on accident rates with the less punitive, more information gathering and guidance related rather than punishment related is very fascinating and really hopeful.
You can't run or you can't hide now with ADSB. So it's all there, and it's even there. My wife follows me around on it all. Okay, yeah. I was at that airport for a long time. I was BSing with some other guys. Yeah, I know I was supposed to be back at 2:30, the whole thing. So technology
exactly
downside sometimes.
Yep. Well, I am going to call it our long-suffering and very wonderful ComancheZOOM coordinators have run out of time. It is 10:23. This has been a marathon session. Will, thank you so much for bringing all of this information out that would never have come out if you hadn't told us what happened to you. And we are so looking forward to seeing you next week.
CJ.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, in the Comanche tips manual, section 1,
Yes.
the flight performance, chapter 1, page 1-20, the configuration between the 7-to-1 and 13-to-1 glide ratio, that information is in there.
Alan, thank you so much. Are you able to be here next week, Alan? Because if so, we can get with you ahead of time and show you how to screen share, or we could go and grab tips chapter 1 and try to put that page up. But since you found it, if you'd like to be here, we'll just make space for you to screen share that info.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the situation will be next week.
Okay, I'll dig into chips.
I can't dig into all of them.
Okay.
I can't meet every Thursday, but I try to whenever I can.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for finding that and putting it up. Can you say again which page it is on the tips chapter 1?
Yeah, it was page 1-20. It was under what it says the right stuff is what it's under, but it comes through what's best for distance and endurance.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, and everybody, the tips was the collected wisdom from like 19 something to 1992 or no 2012 actually, of just Comanche pilots putting knowledge together. The ICS did it.
It's a 2012 issue.
Yep, brilliant. All right.
At this point, I'm gonna.
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead, Will.
I was gonna say thanks for having me. Thanks for all the questions. And next week, I promise the presentation will be much shorter. It's just I think that one will be short, and then the rebuild and the insurance ones will probably be longer. And those are more. I mean, people generally know about the rebuild, but trying to couple a rebuild to a reassembly is should be a good one. But yeah, thank you for having me, and thanks for everybody hanging in there. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no, brilliant. Thanks everybody. Good night all.
At this point, I'm going to cut off the recording. It will be available tomorrow by midday. You go to northeastcomanche.org, click on the ComancheZOOM page, and down at the bottom of that is the list of recordings. You can click on it and hear the whole thing all over again. So with that, I'm going to end the recording, and good night, everybody.
Good night, Pete, and